I don't know what to do. I'm writing this from a plastic chair in a hospital waiting room. It smells like bleach and quiet despair. My parents are in a room down the hall in a coma, and the doctors keep using words like unprecedented and unexplained. But I know what happened. I was there. I watched it happen. And the worst part, the part that is hollowing me out from the inside, is that I think I could have stopped it sooner. My life, up until a week ago, was normal. Boring. Even I'm 80, just finished the soul-crushing marathon of high school final. Exams. My parents are good people. Quiet, loving, a little old-fashioned. My dad is an immigrant, came here with nothing, and has no family in this country. My mom was an orphan, raised in the system, so it's always just been the three of us. A small, tight-knit, unremarkable little unit. After my last exam, I came home and crashed. I was so mentally and physically drained that I slept for nearly 24 hours straight. It was a deep, dreamless, black hole kind of sleep. When I finally woke up, it was the next morning. The sun was streaming through my window, and for the first time in months, I felt light. The weight of school was gone. I felt free. I went downstairs to the kitchen, expecting to find my mom making coffee, the house smelling of toast, and the comfortable quiet of a Saturday morning. My parents were there, but they weren't alone, sitting at our small kitchen table. In my chair was a man I had never seen before. He was maybe in his mid-30s. He had long, straight black hair that fell past his shoulders, a stark contrast to his pale skin. But his eyes were the first thing you noticed. They were a shocking, brilliant, jaundiced yellow, the color of a canary or a fresh bruise, and they were fixed on the bowl of cereal in front of him with an unnerving intensity. My parents looked up as I entered, and they smiled, not their normal, warm smiles. These were bright, brittle, and a little too wide. "Good morning, sleepyhead," my mom chirped, her voice a full octave higher than usual. Come, join us. There's someone we want you to meet." I just stood there, dumbfounded. A million questions were swirling in my head, but none of them could find their way to my mouth. "This is a relative of ours," my dad said, gesturing towards the man with a strange, almost reverent sweep of his hand. "He's been out of the country for a very long time. He's going to be staying with us for a while." I finally found my voice. "A relative? What relative? You don't have any relatives here? And Mom, you don't have any at all?" The bright smiles on my parents' faces faltered for a fraction of a second. A flicker of something panic, annoyance, passed through their eyes before the manic cheerfulness snapped back into place. "Oh, a distant cousin," my mom said, waving a dismissive hand. "From your father's side. It's a long story. We'll tell you all about it later. Now, sit. Have some breakfast." I sat. The meal was the most uncomfortable, unnerving 20 minutes of my life. The man never spoke. He never looked up. From his bowl, he ate with a slow, deliberate precision, lifting the spoon to his mouth and back down without a single wasted movement. My parents, however, never stopped talking. They kept up a frantic, one-sided stream of chatter directed at him, answering questions he never asked, laughing at jokes he never told. "The weather is lovely today, isn't it?" my mom said to him. "You always did love the sun." "We'll have to take you to the park later," my dad added. Just like old times. It was like they were reading from a script, or like they were hearing a conversation that I couldn't. It was insane. Later that day, when I got my dad alone, I pressed him. "Dad, seriously, who is that guy? Where did he come from?" My father's face went cold. The forced cheerfulness vanished, replaced by a stern, hard mask I hadn't seen since I was a little kid who had broken a rule. "His name is not your concern," he said, his voice low and flat. "He is our guest. You will treat him with respect. You will not ask any more questions. This is not up for discussion." And that was it. The conversation was over. The first few days were a masterclass in quiet, creeping dread. The man remained a silent, unnerving presence in our home. He never spoke a word, not one, I tried once. I found him alone in the living room, just standing in the center of the room, staring at a blank wall. "Look," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I don't know who you are or what you're doing here, but this is my home," and I never got to finish. My parents appeared in the doorway as if summoned from thin air. "Don't be rude to our guest," my mother snapped, her voice sharp with a panic I didn't understand. "He's family. Apologize." I just stared at them, then at the silent man with the yellow eyes. And I retreated to my room. The house started to feel less like my home and more like a temple dedicated to this silent, creepy stranger. The power dynamic shifted in ways that were both subtle and terrifying. At dinner, my mother would serve his plate first, and then we would all have to wait. We weren't allowed to take a single bite until he had finished his entire meal, which he always ate with the same slow, methodical pace. Only when his plate was clean were we permitted to eat our own. Now cold, then, we were forbidden from speaking to him directly. "If you have something to say, you say it to us," my dad instructed, his face grim. "We will relay the message." It was absurd. He was sitting right there. But I saw the look in my father's eyes. It was not a suggestion. It was a commandment. The worst part was the locked room. It was the spare bedroom upstairs, the one we used for storage. They cleared it out for him. And they started spending hours in there with him, the door locked from the inside. My mom would take him a tray of food, and then she and my dad would go in with him, and they wouldn't come out until long after dark. I couldn't stand it. The mystery was eating me alive. I had to know what was happening in there. Last night, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I waited until they were all in the room. I crept up the stairs, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The old house has old doors with old-fashioned keyholes. I knelt down, my hands trembling, and put my eye to the cold brass. The room was dark, lit only by a few dozen candles they had arranged on the floor. The air inside seemed to shimmer. And in the center of the room, he was standing. His posture was ramrod straight, like a statue, his head tilted back and his long, thin arms raised towards the ceiling, his fingers splayed. He was utterly, unnaturally. Still doubting my parents. My parents were on the floor in front of him, on their knees. They were prostrated before him, their bodies shaking, their heads bowed to the ground. And they were whispering. A low, rhythmic, frantic stream of gibberish, a language that wasn't a language, a sound of pure, terrified devotion. They weren't hosting a relative. They were worshiping a god. I scrambled back from the door, a wave of nausea and terror washing over me. This was wrong. This was a sickness. My parents were in some kind of cult, and this man was their leader. They were in danger. I was in danger. I ran to my room, locked the door, and I called the police. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial the number. I whispered into the phone, telling the operator that there was a strange man in my house, that my parents were acting erratically, that I was scared for our safety. They said they would send a car over immediately. I hung up, a small sliver of relief cutting through my panic. Help was coming. Knock. Knocked at. The soft, polite knock on my bedroom door made my blood turn to ice. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Knock. Knocked out. I knew who it was. I had never heard him move through the house before. He was always just there. But I knew. I slowly, shakily stood up and opened the door. He was standing there. The man with the long black hair and the terrible yellow eyes. And for the very first time since he had arrived in my home, he was looking directly at me, and he was smiling, It was a wide, thin-lipped, maniacal grin, a grotesque slash of white in his pale face. It was a smile of pure, triumphant malice. All the fear, all the confusion of the past week erupted out of me in a single, raw scream. Who are you? What have you done to them? Get out of my house. The police are coming for you. You hear me? They're coming. He didn't say a word. The horrible smile never wavered. He just held my gaze for a long, silent moment, and then he turned as calmly as if he were going for a stroll, and walked down the stairs. I followed him, stumbling, my mind a blank roar of terror and rage. He walked to the front door, open. and stepped outside. He didn't run. He just walked down the quiet suburban street, his tall, thin figure silhouetted against the streetlights, until he turned a corner and was gone. I ran back upstairs, screaming for my parents. I found them on the floor of the spare bedroom, amidst the extinguished candles. They were lying on their sides, unconscious, their faces pale and slack. They were breathing, but it was shallow, faint. They wouldn't wake up. The police arrived a few minutes later. It was a blur of flashing lights, professional voices, and questions I couldn't properly answer. I told them everything. The man, his yellow eyes, the way my parents were acting, the room upstairs, him leaving just moments before they arrived. I gave them his description. Every single detail burned into my memory. An ambulance came and took my parents away. I stayed with two of the officers. They were sympathetic, I guess, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. They told me they were going to check the home security footage. We had a small, simple system, just a few cameras covering the front and back doors. I sat at my kitchen table, my head in my hands, as one of the officers reviewed the footage on his laptop. After a few minutes of silence, he called his partner over. "Hey, check this out." I looked up. The officer turned the laptop towards me. The screen showed the footage from the front door camera from just a few minutes ago. I saw myself, a frantic, terrified figure following something. I saw myself screaming at the empty doorway. I saw the front door open, as if by a gust of wind, and then close again. But the strange man with the yellow eyes, he wasn't there. He wasn't in the footage at all. It just looked like I was having a complete psychotic breakdown, screaming at nothing. "There's no one there, son," the officer said gently. The cameras didn't pick up anyone entering or leaving the house all night, except for you. I was still staring at the screen, my mind refusing to accept it, when I heard the other officer's voice from the other room. He was on his phone, his voice low and urgent. "Yeah, another one, same as the others. The parents are catatonic. The kid is talking about a tall guy with yellow eyes. No, nothing on the cameras. Same as always. It's the fifth one this year." He trailed off as he saw me looking at him. The officers wouldn't tell me anything else. Just that they would be investigating dots, and now I'm here, at the hospital. My parents are in a deep coma. The doctors have run every test they can think of. They have no answers. Their brains just seem to have shut down Dot. I know what happened. He was real. He was a predator, and my parents were his nest, or his food, or something I can't begin to comprehend. He drained them dry, and then he moved on. And the officer's words. The fifth one this year. He's still out there. He's doing this to other families, and I could have stopped it. I should have called the police the first day. The first hour. The moment I saw him sitting in my chair. But I waited. I was scared. I was confused. And now my parents are gone. Maybe forever, and it's my fault. I failed them. I was the only one who could see the monster, and I did nothing until it was too late. I went to bed like usual, nothing strange. No late night horror movies, no weird noises, just another night. But when I opened my eyes again, I wasn't in my room. I was lying on a rusted hospital bed in a dark, abandoned ward. The air was thick, with dust, the walls stained with something I didn't want to think about, and my sister was standing there too. She had a small backpack on her shoulder, looking just as confused as me. We walked through the corridors, trying to understand where we were. Every hallway looked the same: broken tiles, flickering lights, empty stretchers. It didn't take US long to realize we weren't just in a hospital. We were trapped in a maze. "We need to get out of here," my sister said. I agreed. But no matter how many doors we tried, every path twisted back into itself. Until finally we found an exit, a huge metal door at the end of the corridor. We ran, laughing in relief, hugging each other. We were free. Dot or so, we thought, because the second we touched the handle, a glowing laser shield slammed down over the door. That's when we heard footsteps, familiar voices calling our names. Our friends, except they weren't our friends anymore. Their eyes were empty, their skin gray and rotting. They moved fast, snarling, teeth dripping. Zombies. We ran hand in hand, dodging through the twisting halls. But everywhere we turned, there were more of them. The hospital wasn't abandoned. It was crawling with the dead Dot. We finally found a safe corner as night fell. Hungry and exhausted, I remembered the backpack. Inside was food, water, and weapons like someone had prepared us for this. We ate in silence, and then armed ourselves. For the first time in my life, I felt like the hero of a zombie movie. I even managed to headshot a few of them. For a moment, I almost enjoyed it, but then I noticed something. My sister had been bitten. The skin around the wound was blackening, but unlike the others, she wasn't turning mindless. She was still herself, except sharper, colder. Her eyes studied me in a way that didn't feel like my sister anymore. She knew how to fight, how to think she was becoming something worse than a zombie and then wake up. It's already 10 a.m. What are you doing? I jolted upright. My mom was standing in the doorway. I was in my bed, thought it was just a dream, or at least that's what I thought hours later. When my sister came home from school, I told her everything. She laughed at me, told me to forget it. But when she pushed her hair back, I saw it, the same bite marks from my dream. Right there on her hand, and the way she smiled at me, it wasn't my sister's smile anymore. I've been working on the production side of broadcasting in a major city for the last 10 years. I have a similar sob story as most people. Got a film degree, took a job to pay the bills, and got promoted in a position that's too good to leave. But soul-crushing enough to make me want to jump off the building. Like a lot of people, I shudder at the polarization of our country, and being on the production side of things, I am not in a position to change things. I schedule and keep the room working for the gluttonous sloths to spread their divisive messages. I've stayed in this mind-crushing industry out of fear of going back to my original career major of table waiting, as it didn't have good benefits. It's hard to describe the feeling of being pulled out of the tip slums and held in the arms of a company that at least pretends to care if you live or die. I'm sure they let me bleed out on camera if it meant a mediocre boost in viewership. Maybe it's rotten, but the promotions are nice. It's only within the last 5 years that the guilt has started to pierce my conscience. I spent many nights trying to calculate how much money as a coordinator was worth my soul. The numbers weren't. Good dot, it was just another day coordinating the goings-on of the news set. Cameras were rolling. Assistants were rushing. People were yelling. And the anchor was spouting crap with a grin you'd expect to see out of a pig that enjoyed the taste of its own vomit. The segment ended as usual with adulation, as if we hadn't heard any of this before. I ducked away from the barrage of handshakes and fake smiles and took time in the corner to sulk. I had been feeling extra crappy this month due to our shareholders visiting and my landlord raising my rent. It was nothing I couldn't handle, but I hadn't gotten a raise in almost 5 years and had had my rent risen 3 times. I took a deep breath and went to finish the hour. I began to clean as people cleared out and noticed the news anchor just fiddling with his tie. I tried to make myself seem scarce, but he decided to speak with me. Wild day, ain't it? I didn't. Look at him. Pretty crazy. I tell you, people just keep getting crazier. What an asshole. It is a mystery. How much shit do I have to say to get the attention of these morons? It's not enough to make them mad. You gotta scare him. He shakes his head. I was annoyed but not surprised. You gotta do something to get the sheep's attention. I stopped loving myself a long time ago. Ain't that the truth? He took a hit of a weird-looking vape. You know, I've been watching you. You've been here a while, right? Been here 10 years? Started out as a PA and now a coordinator. He gives me the look of someone trying to buy a prized hog. Yeah, thinking of moving up in this field. You ever think of coming over to the journalism side of things? Thinking of what this dried-up cigar filter did as journalism made me want to puke. I don't know, I originally wanted to direct movies. He laughed as if his stomach were about to make soup. You and every other starry-eyed person under the age of 40. Come on, you've been here a long time and became a coordinator. You could have found more work, but you're still here. He looked at me as if he stumped me. What made you stay here instead of working on films? The man asked a pragmatic and spiritual question. I'm not sure if the existential part of my brain has the bandwidth. I originally got this job after college. For experience? Honestly, I didn't plan on staying here past a year. I got nostalgic about my first year in this city. How innocence can quickly be squashed. Then things got a little interesting. Crazy stories, crazy elections, and enough civil unrest to always have party stories. I got promoted after 6 months and just got comfortable. I guess I have to feel. Like shit in 3 ways. He gave me a smirk. Comfortable? I would never describe my time in front of the camera comfortable. He took a drag out of his creepy vape and laughed. If you find this comfortable, maybe the world of alternative media is up your alley. The thought of this company being up, my alley made me want to bang my head on the wall in the hopes that he'd lost so much of his humanity, that he'd forget to call an ambulance and just let me fade away. I don't know. You should think about it. You have the look and attitude to be a good anchor. You might even be able to put some stories together. I struggle to keep my cool. It sounds interesting, but I'm not sure where I'm going. Think about it. We're looking for someone to train. And I like hiring people who know the business. I thought keeping to myself was a good way to not get promoted. Are these people that antisocial? I just wanted to casually take money from this company. And pretend I wasn't. I figured I'd forget eventually. I don't know if I'll be here that long. We're willing to pay you a good package, well above 6 figures. He turned to face me directly. And it will keep growing. The pay raise is that dramatic after 1 promotion above me. Sir, The high pay is a sign of trust and commitment to our mission. Plus, people in production tend to move from place to place, even if they've been with you for a while. He turned back to the monitors. But 10 years, I think you've earned your spaghetti. He put his vape away and slapped him back. Think about it. You have a week? He walked out the exit before I could say goodbye. I walked slowly down the dark avenue in a state similar to just getting out of an icy river. The confusion I felt was enough to make me push someone into traffic just to avoid making any meaningful decisions. I get a decent paycheck now, but for the amount of time and work, I could be making way more. Production has a way of tricking you. Yay, I'm making 6 figures. After working 90-hour weeks and giving up my life, how much is my soul worth? Triple the salary for half the work isn't the worst answer. I walked into my apartment feeling my resolve slowly come undone as I looked at the mess. I hadn't had time to clean. I figured I just needed to stop being lazy and pick a day to clean. My work hours made it nearly impossible to clean, let alone have a life. The life I did have consisted of getting drunk after work and hanging with my ex-girlfriend who got mad that I didn't demand more time off. Any other time I had was sitting in my room wondering what game I should play until I passed out from exhaustion. The company's morally bankrupt, but this could be my only ticket out. I texted my friend Max, who was a production accountant for the company. Hey, can you chat? For a little. What's up? I was offered training to be an anchor. That's awesome. Get that money. I don't know, man. I feel like I'm making a deal with Satan's abusive dad or something. Dude, I know these guys suck, but this is a chance to work on the inside. Take all the info you can get and do something better when you're ready. I don't know. He said he's paying me a lot more money. He didn't make it sound like a stepping stone. He made it sound like a real commitment. So, this happens a lot. You don't have to be glued to the company forever. Still, I feel dirty. Man, we're already working for the company. We're just the people they deem expendable. Besides, if you want change, working from the inside is the best way. Even if you can't change anything, you can still leave with secrets. I guess. I mean, most of the higher-ups donate to left-wing charities. I don't think you're the only one who has issues with the messaging. They're destroying the country, but they don't actually believe themselves. Wow, that makes everything so much better. Oh, my guy, get in there and change things. And if you don't like it, just leave. At least you'll get more money and an inside scoop on our corruption. I came to work the next morning and found the anchor to tell him I'd like to accept the offer. He shook my hand and told me he'd send an email. His demeanor changed instantly to something more serious. He gave me a look of someone sharing a family secret. I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy the coyness. The next few nights produced a slew of conflicting emotions. I was excited, but also dreading the call and hoped he lost interest. Maybe he didn't like the way I said, "Thank you." After Tuesday, evening passed, I figured he just hired someone with more experience. Maybe he was just doing me a favor, and his bosses were not feeling ready to let a member of the great unwashed into their club. It felt like a party I didn't want to go to was canceled, and I was going to stay home and watch a movie instead. I was about to go to bar and eat cheap pizza when I got the dreaded email. Come to the 4th floor Friday evening when you get off work. Damn it. Friday came and went. After a few minutes of stalling near the crafty table, I made my way to the elevator. I pressed 4 and the elevator began to ascend with the speed of a turtle that was about to work for the rabbit. The doors opened to reveal a room that looked and felt like a marijuana dispensary waiting area from 2005. The walls were blindingly white, yet you could see cracks from years of cigarette smoke and neglect. The seats looked like they were just extensions of the wall, like tongues slurping you into the void. This would have been sensory deprivation if not for the clerk behind the tinted window. She spoke through a speaker asking for my ID. Without the excitement of pot, a place like this felt like a prison in the worst type of modern art painting. The only accessory I saw was a TV in the top corner hanging from the ceiling. That looked like it hadn't worked since the mid-90s. The room was oddly silent. The silence was enough to give you auditory hallucinations, which somehow clerk's presence made worse. I sat 40 minutes in brain-splitting silence, trying to find any way to keep myself busy. But with no service or reading material, all I could do was think about personal stories from the week. At some point, my interviewer stumbled through. Hidden door with a look I could only describe as drunk on gravity. He gave his knees a fast buckle, causing him to slam onto the chair 1 foot from me. He fiddled with his glasses and papers and gave a crusty cough to announce the beginning of this interview. "Kevin, the name is George Gross." He didn't bother to look at me, let alone shake my hand. "So that you want to be an ancha?" It's been gold to keep people informed since I started working here. It's been my goal to find someone with such a thick accent. Well, that you know the business, you got the voice and the looks, and you're recommended by Harry. I have no reason not to hire you. His pupils glanced at me like a mouse, checking if the coast is clear. The question is, do you want this? Of course, this is a great opportunity. Even if it did make my brain bleed, I want to keep the people informed of the cultural forces eroding our nation. I'll take my Oscar. Kid, you can drop the act. I know you don't believe this crap. I give back my Oscar. We see his socials. You bluer than a cranky tinaga. He sat up and turned his body to focus on me. I haven't believed the shit we puke out since the Bushies. His demeanor changed from deciding where to eat to deciding whether or not he wanted to play Russian roulette. Now that you want this, it's a big responsibility. His static eyes made me rethink my decision a little. My buddy was right. Even if I didn't take this and went back to working in production, I'd still be working for the devil. Better to get more money and influence if I'm losing my dignity. I want this. George stood up, collected his things, and left back through the hidden door without so much as a nod. I was beginning to wonder if he had just lost interest in me. When the lights dimmed and the 90s TV in the corner blipped on, George walked out again. In the early part of 1972, Lenny Kingman, our media Minaga, spent most of his nights working behind that counter. One night, there was a ring at the desk. When Lenny came back, he found these tapes. George pulled a smaller-looking VH of his bag. It took me a few seconds to realize I was looking at grungy Betamax. These babies wouldn't come out for another 3 days. No way to watch them. Lenny set him aside. Betamax was released 3 years later. Mystery tapes, huh? George gave me a tepid smile. You can say that again. Lenny ordered a Betamax player and noticed the tapes fit. But we were confused about the logo. Tappy A. Dot. No one had heard of this company. I mean, Dot could it have been a smaller company? Things weren't like that back then. You think a company would have secret first dibs of a new technology if no one heard of them. Sorry, don't exist. Neva existed. He sat down looking at me from his side. Lenny watched the tapes, but they was too degraded to make sense of it. Lenny put it away until 1979. He wanted to show some of us. The tapes, a bit different than he remembered. George put the tape in the Betamax player under the TV in the corner. The TV blipped on and began to show old grainy footage that looked more like stuff you'd see under a microscope. What is TH? George interrupted me. See, watch. The oceanic-looking footage slowly came more into focus, revealing distinct shapes. Still blurry and out of focus, I could only make out two blobs interacting with each other. It looked like one of the blobs was handing something to the other. Blob causing the other blob to shake and fall down. The blob that was still standing retracted its hand, shook and fell just like the first. I got a weird feeling in the pit of my stomach. It felt like I was peeking at a very serious family argument, and I should leave. The scene changed to another location and showed a tapestry of moving blobs. At some point, there appeared to be a whirlwind of the blobs moving around, causing the color of the screen to turn crimson. It was almost hypnotic watching these blobs move in and out of each other, like paint being spun around and made into abstract shapes on canvas. Hands began slowly taking shape around the screen. George paused the video. You're probably thinking, yeah, watching some artsy crap, huh? Like, if Jackson Pollock became a deranged film, maca? That's what I thought. Magnetic tape normally degrades over time. This tape has done the opposite. George pressed play and turned back to look at the screen. What I once thought was hands materializing was the picture coming into focus. The hands became more pronounced, and feet began to appear. Limbs, and then dot faces. The picture got into focus, showing the blobs to be people in the auditorium. They were mangled from what appeared to be an explosion. The faces had me second-guessing my perception. The smiles on their faces made me want to spit out my lunch. The video skipped back to the original scene, which now looked pristine enough for me to see the blobs. They were people. I had witnessed a murder or suicide, their faces. The two looked to be in a state of zen. The sound began to work, revealing a soundtrack with the optimism of exploring space for the first time. The video skipped to a crowd standing in what looked to be a celebration on the Brooklyn Bridge. A bomb went off in the middle of the crowd, killing hundreds. What confused me more than the explosion were the faces. All I could see was pleasant boredom. What I thought was a delayed reaction was acceptance. No, pride. Another bomb went off, followed by another, and still no running or screaming. To be seen, the film cut to a gymnasium filled with a crowd who looked ready for church. The scene fit the theme of the other two. The people smiled as they got their throats slit by the person next to them, followed by a clip of a firing squad shooting at waving pedestrians, planes nose-diving into mountains, and a sneak peek of parents throwing their children down cliffs as easy as you'd skip rocks. George paused the tape again and stared at the wall while holding his chin. We spoke to higher-ups at Sony. They found this ridiculous. Told us there was no way. They doubted an indie producer would have wasted money shooting an expensive movie for a format that didn't exist. We showed one of them the tapes, and he said they weren't made by Sony. I felt heavy. Why are you showing me this? George puts the tape back in. There was a news segment with both anchors smiling. And today we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Great Compromise. 20 years ago, we as a nation became united as to what we wanted to accomplish in the next couple decades. We wanted to preserve, to consume less, and to make our environment flourish, as well as spiritual enlightenment with our nation as. It relates to the rest of the world. We wanted to experience death as a nation united to have a real rebirth. We have developed common goals in this change in the historical method. The video skipped to a reporter interviewing a woman who looked at peace. Ma'am, how are you enjoying your Saturday, and how do you plan on celebrating? She spoke. I feel very proud of my country for the level of understanding it has attained in my lifetime. Sometimes I forget how good we have it these days. Compared to when I was a kid, we have such assurance with ourselves and the nation. To answer your other question, today I plan to commit the enlightenment ritual. Our kids will be asleep because ... well, you know, the reporter laughed. Ah, too young to understand? Yeah, but my husband and I will have our own send-off once. The kids are gone. Sounds like a meaningful evening. I wish you luck. The reporter walks away from the lady and looks at the camera. There you have it. Another spectacular celebration of united compromise and common goals. Back to you, Richard. George switches the TV off and turns on the lights. There's Mo footage. Takes place a year later and it looks like a bong went off. He looked me in the eye. I won't show you that video till you's committed at Vista. Yay, Miss New Roll. George disappeared into the hidden door. I asked the clerk if that was it, but no sound came from that tinted glass. She might have left a while ago. To be safe, I waited 15 minutes and left. I got home and spent the next few hours searching the internet for videos like the ones I saw. I checked all the B-roll sites, stock footage, films with end-of-the-world themes, this site, and as. Mini-A photos and videos I could find. Nothing. What I saw was like looking into an alternate world. It was specific and tight. I received an email from an unknown email. Dear Travis ... Thank you for taking an interest in our Polar World Inc. After our meeting today, we have decided to give you an offer of employment. If you accept our offer, we look forward to working with you to help keep peace through division. Please respond with a night you can come for orientation. You possess the gift too, you know. The spiritual lady, dressed in her off-the-shoulder flowy lilac top, said to me. She shuffled tarot cards between her wrinkled hands, her plasticky nails flashing bright pink as the cards flowed from one hand into the other. I agreed sarcastically, nudging my cousin Whitney. She snort-laughed and took another swig from her blue WT down. My granddad thought it would be a good idea to have a psychic night at our pub. Everyone else thought. It was stupid. I was about 16 at the time, and until recently hadn't thought about that psychic lady for years. I've never really believed in that sort of thing. I see it as taking money off of vulnerable people, but I have always believed in the supernatural. And the otherworldly due to recent events, I can no longer doubt the existence of monsters unless I doubt my own senses. My senses may have been mildly affected by a certain substance that isn't yet legal in the UK, but I know what I saw. Even if I didn't know for certain, my cousin Whitney saw it too. I now know that what we saw has a name. A sea creature, much older than the pub, who may even be older than the town itself, was dubbed the Blue Blower by my ancestors, if you've taken a look at Whitney's posts, you'll understand why we're currently hiding in the shitty part of suburban London, where my junkie uncle Charlie lives, huddled on the peeling leather sofa in his tiny council flat. I'm taking stock of everything that happened and trying to piece some bits together. Whitney is curled up on one end with the big leather-bound book in her lap that supposedly contains a record of all the family members that my ancestors left down in the tunnels for the Blue. What it doesn't tell me is why. She lamented, it's just a list of names. I'm sure your dad and Auntie Tanya will have answers. But two of them had left us to go and get provisions. A silence passed between us, only interrupted by the sound of Whitney turning pages when I finally found the gumption to say, "You know what I'm worried about?" "What?" She responded without looking up from the book. "Who else is gonna die now that we've left? You were supposed to be the sacrifice. It's going to be hungry. We've got little cousins, Tanya's kids, my siblings." Still avoiding eye contact, she shuffled in her seat and sat up straight. "I think the monster chooses who he wants. I don't think we get to choose. Clearly he didn't want our little cousins." "How do you know that?" I asked. "Just a hunch." She shrugged. Whitney doesn't have hunches. She's the least intuitive person I know, other than when the blue blower was messing with her head. In fact, she often goes against what should be a natural survival instinct. Not that she isn't brave. I envy that. Not to say I don't have my moments. I'd say facing off against my 6-foot father was quite brave. But for her, it's her natural state of being. For me, bravery was a bit of a foreign concept until recently. Something clicked for me as I watched my father stab Whitney in the neck with a needle. His own niece. I watched in horror as her eyes closed and her body went limp. When I opened my mouth to yell, getting a surge of what felt like bravery, I felt something get me in the neck too. The pain reminded me of a wasp sting, but deeper. The substance I had been injected with forced me into a deep, black, dreamless sleep. When my eyes opened again, I was staring up at my granddad's second wife. A thin and glamorous older woman who always had perfectly styled hair. I never liked granddad's second wife, Nicole Reed. If you've watched Only Fools and Horses, she reminds me of Del Boy's evil ex-fiancée, Pauline. She's my Auntie Tanya's mom, but they couldn't be more different. I don't think my granddad ever loved Nicole, and I don't think she cared much for him either. I suppose their marriage came out because my grandfather was lonely after the divorce from my non. But I've never been sure what she got out of their marriage. A bit of money, maybe. As Nicole stood over me, watching me wake up, her face was twisted in a smug half-smile. I sat up abruptly and crawled away from her on the cold cellar floor. She rolled her eyes and followed me. Double quotes, Mike. I have no interest in hurting you. I just want you to listen to me. I hated that tone. She had. The most insufferable telling off voice any man could have, whiny, shrill, and condescending. Where's my dad? I asked, ignoring what she'd said before. That's not important. You and I need to have a chat. What did you do with Whitney? I'm getting to that, Michael. She snapped curiously. I watched her take a large leather-bound book off the top of the whirring ice machine. She sat down on a chair, crossed her legs, and opened the tome. As she opened it, I noticed a large ornate letter M on the front cover. I looked around in case someone else was down there with us, witnessing what the hell was going on. But no, it was just me and my creepy step-grandmother, who was about to read me a story. Apparently. Nicole sat up straight, cleared her throat, then began to read. The blue blower is big and blithe. He dwells in wet dark where you can dive. He asks but one thing of you and I, for one of you must come and die. Then she turned to me. I have no idea what she expected. Applause? A nod of appreciation for her stunning performance. I stared at her blankly until I asked, what's a blower? Oh, I think you've seen him. You and your little trouble-making cousin found him all by yourselves. She placed the book back on top of the ice machine and stood up. I never liked Whitney. She's always been a brat. Like when she stole that ring your grandfather gave me. That was Great Nanny B's ring. I corrected her. What's going on here anyway? Right. She sighed, clearly annoyed that she had to explain something to me. See, Michael, usually the majority of the family is spared the tragedy of knowing one of you was murdered by an ancient sea beast. But your cousin seems to refuse to call it a sacrifice, because of course she does. Either that or we were wrong. And the Blar doesn't want her after all, which makes no sense because he prefers young women and the sign he sent us pointed to her. He's never refused an offering before. She looked around the cellar with her hand on her chin. I stared at her wide-eyed and deeply confused. Is Whitney? I looked over at the old wooden door. Nicole nodded with a wolfish grin. In this situation, my cousin would have jumped up and started swinging for Nicole, demanding to know where the key was. Then she'd go running into the tunnels looking for me. But I decided to handle things differently. Why her and not me? I asked, buying time as I looked around the cellar for a weapon. Nicole shrugged. That's just who he wanted. Is there not a way that you can decide? Like an old ritual or something? No. We suppose he just picks whoever is most expendable out of the younger members of the family. Whitney isn't expendable. Nicole laughed. It's too late. To try and make me feel sorry for her now, she's probably already dead. And if that's the case, we can put this whole thing behind us and not think about it for another century. When did you get so evil? I'm not evil, Michael. I'm protecting my village. It's a basic utilitarian concept. We sacrifice one of our own, and in return, the blue blower leaves us alone until he needs to feed again. And who decided this? Have we ever tried anything different? Have we ever tried to kill it? Despite believing in it to an extent, I have always been a skeptic of the supernatural up until seeing the blue blower with my own eyes. But now I felt as if I could believe in anything. My understanding of the world had been shattered, but now it felt as if the pieces were starting to come back together, just in a new way. I remember what the psychic had said to me all those years ago. I could feel something. I know that sounds silly because, of course, you can always feel something. The ground beneath you, the clothes on your skin, the wind in your hair. But I could feel something in the ground, in the air, like an emotion or a feeling. A sign, tension, a disturbance in the force. Spidey sense. Something. An event was about to happen. The feeling emanated from above me. I looked up through the middle of the swirling spiral staircase's banister. Suddenly I rolled out of the way. A huge black book came soaring down from the top of the stairs. It smacked into my step-grandmother's head. Then it bounced and landed on the floor with a thud, landing front cover side up. Family photo album. A red dot 2 energy stirred from the loud bang. My Aunt Tanya from upstairs, who was afraid, determined, and a little confused, and my father in my granddad's office. He was scared, but it was wrapped in deep hot anger. Nicole swayed, putting her hand to the wound on her head before she toppled over. Like a rag doll, she crumpled onto the stone floor. I heard Tanya run down the stairs and a series of rushed, pattering footsteps. Scrambling to my feet, I jumped up, knowing my dad was going to jump out and grab her if I didn't get there first. Hurriedly, I ran up the cellar steps. I saw my dad opening the door to the hallway. He stared at me in stunned surprise, and I took advantage of his confusion. I sent my fist into his cheek, which made a sickening crunch sound as it fractured. Beneath my fist, Tanya, who had reached the bottom of the stairs, gasped and took a few steps back. My father locked eyes with me, and this time he was full of blind rage. He returned my punch, getting me in the eye, before he grabbed a hold of me and slammed me against the wall. "What do you think you're doing?" he yelled. I hated it. When he yelled, it sent me back to when I was a kid and I'd wake up in the middle of the night screaming, and he'd yell and yell about me waking him up. He'd always yell about anything I did. I wonder if he just liked yelling. "Where's the key?" I asked him calmly. My composure only irritated him further. I inherited that from my mother. A trait he despised. Doesn't matter because you aren't getting it. He grinned. I decided to keep stalling him. I saw Tanya slink behind us and dip into the office. "Why not?" I asked, feigning disappointment. Tanya began rummaging around as silently as she could. He sighed and rolled his eyes. "When will you understand that I only ever do things for your own good?" "Like what?" I goaded. "Like sacrificing my life to put a roof over your head, to keep you fed and housed." "Oh, so the basic things you need to live as a human being?" "Thanks, Kevin, you're father of the year." Sarcastic little cunt. His voice boomed. He slammed me against the wall again. My back hurt after the blow and it winded me. "You'd be the one down in those tunnels if I hadn't fought Tooth. And nail for you." Tanya showed me the key before she slipped it into her pocket. I launched my forehead into my father's nose. There was another crunch. His grip loosened and he groaned in pain. I wriggled free, dashing away down the hallway as quickly as I could. He caught me and a wrestle ensued between us. Desperately, he was trying to drag me away from the stairs as I was trying to throw him down them. "You know you might be the shittest excuse for a son out there. I don't even think you're mine," he said as he held my head over the edge of the banister, his thick fingers squeezing into my face. "Wouldn't put it past your mother." It was that comment that sent me over the edge. Well, it sent my father over the edge, really, I should say. I used all my adrenaline and a bit of spite to hoist myself up and fling him down the staircase. Rolling, he bumped it down the stairs like something out of a slapstick comedy. His roll ended with a thump on the cellar floor. I looked down at him from the banister as he laid beside Nicole, both of them slowly bleeding out. Tanya put her shaking hand on my shoulder as we both looked at our comatose parents. Then I watched her go downstairs and grab the leather book with the, come on kid. She smiled at me as she reached the top of the stairs. It looked like she'd had some kind of tussle herself. Her hair had specks of blood matted in it. What happened to you? I asked. They tied me up upstairs. After I tried to stop them taking Whitney down there, they decided it was best if I stayed away until it was done. You okay? Oh yeah, this blood isn't mine. She smiled. Bit of a dark horse is our Auntie Tanya. I need to go to the beach. I told her, you stay here in case she comes back this way. I need to stay here anyway. Charlie's coming? Seriously. He's all we've got left. She shrugged. Fine. Whatever. I'll ring you when I find Whitney. I felt around in my pocket for my phone and my knife. Oh, sorry, I took your pocket knife. I gave it to Whitney. I slid it in her pocket in case she needed it. Good thinking. I went to turn to leave when I suddenly remembered something. Have we got any rope? Yes. In the storage cupboard in the garden. Thanks. See you in a bit. We gave each other a quick hug before I ran out of the pub and out into the garden, after fumbling around and knocking countless tools and pots of paint onto the floor of the shed. I grabbed the rope and raced off to the seafront hard thudding. I paced back and forth along the sand, my eyes darting toward any possible sign of movement on the water. I texted Tanya here and there just to feel like I was doing something. It felt like too much time had passed. The tide was beginning to go out, and I was starting to lose hope. Just as I felt a panicked tear fall from my eye, I saw movement in the water. In the moonlight, I saw the water fizz and bubble, caused by Whitney and the monster splashing and thrashing around. Whitney's face broke the surface. I gasped with relief as she gasped for air. Then suddenly she was pulled under again. My heart sank frantically. I'd picked up my rope with the weight on the end of it and swung it. I just had to hope it would land where Whitney could reach. I sent the weight hurtling across the water, the weight on the end of the rope splashed onto the surface, as far as I could throw it. I waited with bated breath to feel Whitney pull on it. I couldn't blink as I waited. Once again, it felt like too much time had passed. I saw her in my mind's eye slowly drifting down into the depths of the sea, fading into the dark water. Fuck, I thought, fuck, I threw it in the wrong place. I could feel her fading, the life draining from her. I started pulling off, my shoes ready to go, diving in after her, when by some miracle her head broke through the surface again, gasping for breath. I heard myself cheer and I grabbed the rope. Excitedly, I pulled her to shore. Once she was within arm's reach, I ran into the water. She pulled herself onto her staggering feet, and once she was in front of me, she pulled me into an embrace and clung. To me, she coated my clothes in freezing salty seawater, but I was too happy to care. I helped her onto the sand, took stock of her injuries, then hauled into my Uncle Charlie's stinky car. And now, the reward for our ordeal is my uncle's flat. With its peeling wallpaper and the lack of decor and furniture, I always thought defeating a monster came with better rewards than this. I looked over at Whitney again as she read through the old book. I wasn't satisfied with Whitney's just a hunch answer. I could tell she had more to say. There's something you're not telling me, I said to her. Finally, she looked up from the book and looked at me nervously. Oh, it's not a nice thing to hear. Tell me. She inhaled, put the book on the sofa's armrest, and then began. When I was in the manor house and the monster followed me, he started repeating a conversation between our dads. It was some argument about whether it was you or me that was going to end up being fed to the monster. They both didn't want us going down there. But my dad said something like, send the weird one down, she admitted, hanging her face in shame that she'd kept it from me. Awkwardly, I laughed. But in truth, what she told me frightened me to my core. Uncle Charlie is an irrational, inconsistent, and impulsive man. Who's to say he won't try to feed me to the blue blower again? He would see an act like that as proof he loves Whitney, which is something she will never believe because ultimately he doesn't. He's a bit like my dad. He likes the idea of being a father, but doesn't enjoy fatherhood in practice. Unfortunately, I know we have to go back. It horrifies me, but I know we have no choice. I know the blue blower is still alive. Injured and retreating, but still alive. I have this awful, sickening gut feeling that until he has me, and I can feel it in my bones, that it's me that he's wanted all along. He'll keep eating innocent people. I must admit, my step-grandmother was right. It is a basic utilitarian concept. We'd have peace for 100 years if I sacrificed myself. The final line of the poem won't leave my mind. I hear it over and over again. It keeps me up at night. It repeats on loop like an instruction over a Tanoair song, a mantra in my head. The words make me come out in goosebumps, and I know whichever ancestor wrote them for me, penned them with the knowledge it was something a successor needed to hear, for one of you must come and die. Well, I come from a town in the south, a small town, really small, I'd say 664 inhabitants. A place that was only not forgotten because of faith. Since its people make a point to provoke God every single day, my family is very religious, even by local standards. My dad is the second pastor in town. The first is his father, who gave up the position and disappeared. My dad had me after a trip to another town when he was young, around 30, I'd say. He got my mom pregnant outside of marriage, and when he came back, his father made him pray for so many hours on corn kernels that his knees bled for days. To this day, he struggles to walk because of it. That's how he ended up being forced to marry my mom, who, for some reason I don't think I'll ever understand, gave up her chance at a decent future to be a housewife. Anyway, she never let that stop her from loving me, unlike my father. Most people in town know I'm the result of a carnal sin, and because of that, they barely look me in the eye. At a tiny school, they usually throw trash at me. All of them look at me differently. Except Abby. She's the baker's daughter. We've been friends since 4th grade. When she punched a girl in the face for pushing me during PE, you usually skip Sunday Mass just to annoy her mom. Normally, she comes to my house. We stay together until the time she's supposed to go home, and she pretends to fall asleep so she misses it. But one time was different. We were silent. She was reading, and I was watching her eyes glide over the words. At some point, she put the book down, came over to me, sat on the bed, and whispered, I was at Tom's house. Tom was a weird boy from our school, didn't have many friends. He was the son of the guy who owned the engineering shop. I think it's a bit farther from town. Not sure. I knew they were supposed to work on a history project together, but I never thought Abby had feelings for him. I looked at her in silence. It was 2 weeks ago. I swear I regret it, she went on. I was stunned. Not because she had sinned or anything like that. I wasn't mad or disgusted. Just ... empty. It was a strange feeling, but either way, I kept listening to her. I'm scared of losing you. I'm scared of the disgust you might feel for me, she said through tears. I'm physically incapable of feeling anything negative about you. I replied with a small smile. She looked at me, blinking, stunned. They'd hate me if they knew. At that point, we were lying squeezed together in a single bed. You get used to it after a while, I said. She turned her face away while I stared at the ceiling. They can't know. He wouldn't tell, I said, turning quickly to check the time. You should be going home. Your mom's gonna kill me if she finds out you're here. She took the watch from my hand, jumped out of bed, and slipped on her shoes. I lost track of time. I'll talk to you at school tomorrow. Bye, she said. Running to the window and vanishing into the dark dot, everything seemed normal. Until one night. The night Abby knocked frantically on my window. I woke up knowing something was wrong. She never comes at this hour, I thought. When I opened the window and saw her eyes, I knew what had happened. But I prayed I was wrong. My prayers were useless when I saw the bright red blood on her knees spreading across her white nightgown. I knew. I sat on the edge of the bed. She walked toward me slowly, knelt down, and rested her head lightly on my lap, her brown hair falling over my legs. She looked up, hands clasped over her chest like she was praying. As I asked what had happened, then she looked, without blinking. Big eyes, but lifeless this time. He told He told them everything. I stared, shocked, hands in her hair. What? Why would he do that? I said, I begged for forgiveness, but they won't accept it, she said, tears running down her cheeks. I kissed her head softly. She looked at me, then sat next to me and hugged me. She whispered apologies, but we were interrupted by the sound of my parents' bedroom door opening slightly and the hallway light turning on. She hid in my closet, and I pretended to be asleep. My dad opened the door just enough to check if I was in bed, then closed it and went downstairs to answer the phone, which I only then realized was ringing. Abby came out of the closet and sat on the bed with me. We were trying to figure out who had called. Hello? Who's this? My dad's deep voice said. I quickly grabbed my phone to listen in on the call. Hi, this is Martina. Didn't know you had my number, he said. But why are you calling so late? Well, it's my daughter, Abby. I'm afraid your daughter's influence is affecting my Abby. She said in her annoying, hoarse voice. I don't really understand what you're trying to say, but if my daughter did something, I'm sure I can teach her about it, my dad replied. I looked at Abby. She seemed scared. That's what I was hoping. Thank you. And she hung up. After that night. She stopped going to school and stopped calling me. I'm worried about what her mom might have done. My dad hasn't spoken to me since the call. I don't know if he's planning some punishment. If anything happens, I'll have to update this. It's been about 7 months since I signed my year-long lease for this shithole apartment. I don't think I'll be making it another 5 months. I'm not sure if I'll even make it another night. My cheapness might have cost me my life. I was going to make this a short cry for help before I remembered that no one would ever believe me and it would be too late anyway. Hell, I wouldn't believe this if I stumbled across it. I'll just take my time here and pour my heart out. 7 months ago, I made what I now realize was the worst decision of my life. I moved into this dumpy-ass apartment building after finally making the move out of my hometown. I had romanticized the idea of escapism so much. I pictured myself in New York City or something like that, walking down the sidewalk with some overpriced coffee in my hands and my tasteful messenger bag slung around my shoulder. I'd be walking to somewhere idyllic, maybe a get-together with new friends that took an interest in me or something like that. I never made it too far into that daydream. I just wanted to get out of that little rural town. It was one of those towns that was just a road with a bunch of sad old signs along it, blown-out buildings with occasional passing silhouettes that were once somebody's. Let's just say, I couldn't afford New York City, but I could afford a small city a few hours from that rotting place of a town. It's a city with some high-rises and skyscrapers, but nothing that's going to put it on somebody's road trip. It's a pretty lonely place, honestly. It's old and tired like my hometown, but in a more industrial way. Walkability isn't much of a reality here unless you want to take your chances with the harsh weather or the rampant mugging, so there went my sidewalk daydream. Still, I wanted to make the most of the experience. I got an apartment right downtown for a reasonable price and figured life would improve from there on. However, I failed to truly grasp how much of a piece of shit the apartment was until I moved in. I was a little too naive at the time to understand the spectrum of stress caused by a landlord special. The doorknobs would come right off, the fridge never fully shut. The toilet wouldn't flush without some sacred jiggling sequence. And a whole mess of other inconveniences or hazards. This apartment also has a lot of strange features. The floor. Plan doesn't make much sense, and anyone with a shred of interior design knowledge or even just self-respect would then immediately cross this place off their list. I was so desperate, though, that I didn't mind when I entered the apartment and just saw a hallway full of closed doors. I shrugged off how strange it was that each room was contained behind one of those doors, with none of the rooms connecting to one another. The kitchen is its own closed-off room. The living room, too. The only way to get anywhere in the apartment was to take the central hallway. It honestly looks like one of those hallway chase shots in Scooby-Doo or some shit. For how awful the place is, it's not small. There are a good amount of rooms, and I actually hadn't been able to fill one particular room until recently. When you walk into the place, there's the long hallway and then 9 doors total. There's 4 on the left side, 4 on the right, and one at the very end of the hallway. On the right side, the doors in order are the living room, a closet, then my bedroom, and then the bathroom. On the left side, it starts with the kitchen, then another closet, the dining room, and a second bedroom. The 9th door in the middle is that extra room. I barely had enough stuff just to fill the other rooms, and I lacked any sort of motivation to do anything with the extra room for a while. I have a corner unit, so all the rooms on the right side of the apartment have windows as well as the extra room. The extra room has these neat casement windows that I like to look out of, but offer little privacy. I had thought to make the extra room a sort of reading area or a home theater type deal, but I was flat broke. The extra room is strange. It's really big and open. It feels like an apartment of its own. One night, I was in there just looking out at the other surrounding high rises when I noticed the light switch that had been painted over right next to the window. I didn't think much of it. It was clearly just another amenity of my shithole apartment. I left it alone as time went on. I found myself in that extra room most nights just looking out the window. I didn't have the money for any fancy streaming services nor friends to leech off of, so I just looked out that window most nights. It was peaceful, and at night the city looked bigger and more lively. I loved seeing all the different lights. The blurry shapes of people in their own world, watching their TV or making dinner. It didn't take long for me to start picking at the paint on that hidden light switch. As I watched the world wind down every night, I'd chip away at the paint, little by little with my finger while I was lost in my thoughts. It took a few days to make any sort of progress, but eventually I had peeled off enough paint to see the light switch. It was a different color than the new plain white paint that covered everything else. It was bronze, and the switch itself was almost antique looking. It got me wondering how old this building was. A few nights later, the old switch was finally uncovered. It caught the light in an intoxicating way, and I flipped the switch on and off a few times to see if it still worked and what it controlled. Nothing changed. The next night brought a heavy snowstorm. It was beautiful, and you already know I was set up at that window staring out at the world as the brilliant snow fell. At some point, I was reminded of the bronze light switch, and I flicked it, not remembering if I'd already tried it the night before. Nothing changed. I absentmindedly flicked it again, and noticed something strange out of the corner of my eye. A light turned on in the building across the street. That it was the rightmost room on the top floor of the neighboring high-rise, which was quite a bit taller than my building. At first, I just thought it was something new to look at. My hand still. On the switch, I craned my neck up and leaned in to watch the new light. I lost concentration and flicked the switch down, and the room's light turned off. That caught my attention. I looked down at the switch and back up at the now dark pane of glass. I flipped the switch up, and at that exact moment, the room's light turned back on. I continued doing this for probably 5 minutes, just flipping the switch on and off, and watching as the faraway room's light perfectly matched. The snow began falling even more, but I could still make out the light turning off and on with every flick of the old switch. I was baffled before too long. So baffled that I went right to sleep. Convinced I was deprived of logic and reasoning, the next night came, and at first I was definitely reluctant to mess with that switch or two, even go in that room. I tried staring out other windows, but they were cloudy with trapped moisture. I remember thinking I should get a cat or something before I finally caved and walked into the extra room. There was traffic on the street below from some accident that night, and it provided me with enough entertainment to remain distracted from what happened the night before. The standstill row of gray cars could only stimulate me for so long before I was looking at that switch again. I flipped it. Such a harmless action, and so quick too. Flipping a light switch, usually done by second nature. What's the harm in it? Why did flipping that switch feel so important? The same room from the night before it lit up. It was a yellow, more vintage-looking tone of light. I tried using some beaten up binoculars from my childhood, but all I got was a somehow fuzzier view of the room. From my vantage, I could only really see the ceiling of that mysterious place. That's gotta be an apartment, right? It looks too big to be a storage closet, too small to be anything commercial. I flipped the switch again and the light turned off in perfect succession. Is somebody fucking with me? Flip. The light came back on. How would they even orchestrate that? I sat there for a long time, repeatedly flipping the switch on and off as if the repetition of this would bring more clarity. I stood there flipping that switch on and off like I was a geriatric old man smacking a television set, hoping for a signal. The traffic jam cleared out and the streets became empty. I sat there still as I could be, periodically flipping the switch on and off. The light sensed every single time. Clearly this light switch, for some reason, was wired to that room and the building across the street. As to why, I had no earthly idea. What an expensive project, and for what? What purpose does it serve? I flipped the switch up and the light came back on. That last flip of the switch activated a, light bulb moment within me. What if I found a way into that room? So I waited in the bitter cold, rehearsing my moves. I had counted up from the ground and determined the room which connected to my light switch was on the 31st floor, and again it was the corner unit on the right side of the building when viewing from my apartment. I waited for someone to go in, or out of the building. Finally, I saw a woman with a giant coat drag her scrappy little dog towards the door. I was hesitant to actually go inside, but then I gathered some courage, walked right up to that door, and casually slid through as she opened it. I had planned some elaborate cover story that my friend wouldn't answer his phone and all that. But when it came time, I just acted natural and thanked her as I entered. The halls were green and sickly looking, much like my apartment building. The elevator was questionable at best and creaked a little too much as I stepped into it. There were 33 floors, so I was glad I had made note of the correct one. I slowly reached up and hit the circular button for the 31st floor, and it flickered. On, glowing with a jaundiced yellow dot, my hands grew clammy as the elevator ascended at a tortuously slow pace. I watched the numbers rise. 11, 12, 13. This is a stupid idea, man. This is all in my head. Why am I doing this? 26, 27, 28. Is this even legal? What am I going to do exactly? The elevator finally dinged and bounced to a stop on the 31st floor before I had an actual plan. The doors were reluctant to open, and for a moment, my heart sank thinking I had been trapped in there. Those silver doors creaked and warped as they moved out of the way and exposed me to another green hallway. I stepped out and turned left. I could see all the way down the long, dilapidated hall, the green lights humming and buzzing. My alleged culprit was the final door on the right. It was room 3118. I sat outside the door like a maniac, just looking at it. I wondered what to do. I could barely see through the slits on the sides of the door. All I could make out was that the lights were on in there. Do I knock? I looked around me and made sure the coast was clear. What the hell do I say? Maybe I'm lost. Maybe it's an honest mistake. If anyone lives in there, I'm sure they're very confused about their lights turning on and off. But why wouldn't they take control of their own lights? Maybe they can't use them, but that doesn't make any sense. Why would I be able to control their lights, but I knocked on the door and startled myself. It felt almost automatic. Unsure of what to do, I started to shuffle away and make my retreat. Then I decided to stay and wait. I waited for a few seconds. The pause was long and uncomfortable enough for my hand to instinctually rise for another round of knocking. A faint and vague sound, dampened enough to even be of my own mind. But it was the sound of dragging, or a thud of some kind with something rolling afterward. What was that? The sound might have continued, or my mind might have kept wandering. Maybe the neighbors? The walls were thin in this place. I could begin to hear indiscernible conversation somewhere down the hall. I could hear the hissing chatter of a TV show somewhere else, underneath all that though. In room 3118, a rolling sound still. Maybe? What is that noise? I left not long after. I was getting freaked out, and I'm sure I would have freaked out anyone living there. When I got back to my place across the street, I felt very paranoid. I felt like I was being watched. I opened the squeaky door to my apartment and the wall. Dark hallway of 9 closed doors now made me nauseous with dread. I wanted to leave that apartment behind and run back into my mom's arms or something. I felt like a child. I walked in though, and I wish I hadn't. I took a scorching hot shower. It made me feel a little better, but I was still so paranoid. I kept hearing, or thought I was hearing, similar thudding and rolling sounds in one of the other rooms. Old pipes. That's all. It took some more courage to leave the bathroom and enter the cold, dark hall. I didn't know what door to go through next, the kitchen door, bedroom door, or the extra door. My stomach was in a knot, but I thought I should probably try and eat something. It was around midnight by that point, and I felt hopeless knowing there were so many more hours of dark left. I looked down at my half-eaten peanut butter sandwich and knew this knot in my stomach wouldn't go away. If I didn't have some kind of closure, I wanted to go into the extra room and turn off that switch for the night. I braved the silent hallway again and opened up the night. Door into that grand room that turned the faintest sound into a booming echo. I walked up to the big window I always look out of and, with great caution, looked up at room 3118. The light was still on, and there's something up there now. I couldn't tell what it was, but it looked like a big shadow. It wasn't a person, but something boxy looking. Something square or just rigid, really. Furniture? Did someone move something around in there? I didn't know what I was looking at, and I honestly didn't have the mental space to think about it much longer. I flipped off the light. I flipped it back on. I couldn't deny my interest. I was very invested in this whole ordeal now, the rigid. Things started moving, at least I thought it looked like it was slowly changing position. It moved very smoothly and very, very slow. It looked like it was rolling or sliding. It rolled from the right side of the window to the left. I flipped the switch here and there to see if it made any sort of difference. It didn't seem to. I watched it roll along for a few minutes from right to left until I jumped at the sight of a neighboring window's light turning on. It was whoever lived in room 3116. I saw a person moving around in there, and it looked like a more elderly man. He looked like he was listening closely to something, as if there were an intruder in his house. I didn't know what to do, but now I felt intrusive watching this man fumble around. I decided to switch the light off in 3118 and try to forget about the whole thing. I wanted to remove myself from this weird nightmare entirely. I decided that the next day I'd try to disconnect the switch and install some curtains. Find a new hobby. That all sounded like something rooted in everyday monotony, and I let the comfort of curtain shopping lull me to sleep. In my sleep at night, I heard the sound of aggressive wind chimes far away. They weren't very melodic wind chimes, sort of just one tone that reverberated. Then I heard an awful banging sound. It was loud and most definitely not a dream. It sounded distant, but it contained a lot of power. It was 3:48 a.m. I tossed, and I turned some until my bedroom started flashing red. I got out of bed and tried to see what was happening outside from my bedroom window, but I couldn't see through all the gloom trapped in between the glass. I had no choice but to go into the extra room if I wanted to see outside. There was a large fire truck that was blocking off one side of the road, and police were putting up caution tape on the other. Squad cars were rolling in one after the other. A few ambulances were present too, but it seemed like no one was in a big rush. They were all circled around, their hands waving about in a casual, conversational way. At some point, one of them looked up and pointed, and the others followed along. I followed the trajectory of the gestures all the way to the 31st floor. Room 3116 was now missing its pane of glass. The curtains whipped out into the open world. The lights were still on, and I could make out vague details of the interior. Back on the ground, a few paramedics moved out of the way long enough for me to see what I was already preparing to see. The old man from room 3116 was laying there in a confusing mess of fabric, flesh and bones surrounded by a growing puddle of blood. I was shocked at what the hell was going on. What did I do? Am I losing my mind? Did I inadvertently kill that man? The next few days were a blur. My head was heavy with the endless hum of 1,000 different thoughts, all saying similar things. I felt an immense weight of guilt, even though there was nothing tangible that connected me to the old man's plunge. In my head, there was an ever-growing web of continuity. I uncovered the old switch. I flipped it incessantly, and in doing that, I created or resumed something. That something looked like a giant fucking rectangle that rolled around and made a man jump to his death. Or maybe it pushed him out by force, but why? None of this makes any sense. Maybe it's all just make-believe. I could have misunderstood what I saw. The rolling rectangle thing. Maybe it was just an illusion. That old man? Maybe it's just a coincidence he chose tonight to leap. I know what I saw. I no longer was going into the extra room for any reason. The thought of that big empty space with that damn switch made me nauseous. I couldn't stand sleeping just a few doors away from it. I wanted to move out and get away. I should have done that. Reality doesn't make room for fiction, though. I couldn't and still can't afford to break my lease, not by a long shot. That's 3 rent payments and a bundle of paperwork in this godforsaken building. The apartment's obviously outdated, so I thought about making a case for lead paint. Or something toxic that could maybe get me out of here for free and quick, but I'm not sure how that'd blow over. I don't even know how to go about doing something like that, God. I chose the route of avoidance. If I could ignore the extra room, the mystery switch, the dead man's browning bloodstain on the road, and the rolling rectangle monster whose whereabouts weren't known, maybe it'd all just fade away with time. A few weeks went by and that strategy was seeming to work. Even in that short time, I was afforded some hindsight of the whole event, how I was jumping to conclusions. Being paranoid and maybe not appreciating my deteriorating vision that was probably making some serious guesswork. Still, there was no explaining away the light switch. That switch is undoubtedly connected to room 3118 across the street for some unknown reason. I must have tested it hundreds of times. I tried to not let that fact dig too deep when I couldn't sleep, or when I think I heard the rolling sounds. Across the apartment late at night. Eventually, I had saved up enough money to treat myself with some more furniture. I wanted to reclaim the extra room and make it mine. I started with a thrifted recliner and some shelves. I was planning on making it a home theater after all. I had plans to bury the big casement windows behind blackout curtains. Earlier tonight, I was moving some new finds into the home theater. The room's echo was just as booming and awful as when it was empty, and I flinched with every screech and scrape the furniture would make when I moved it, as I heaved the new TV stand around. My eyes subconsciously checked on room 3118, a reflex. That must have been built into me after all those cold nights. The lights were off as I had left them the last time I flipped the switch. The lights were on in room 3116. Don't, single quotes, don't freak out. Maybe someone new moved in. I watched longer than I should have. I don't know why I'm so nosy. Always trying to get to the bottom of everything. I watched and waited for any sign of movement in room 3116. I never saw a soul in their dot at some point. The big coat lady came out of the building with her dog, and for some stupid reason, I felt compelled to go talk to her. I just need to be sure of something. I walked casually down the sidewalk, waiting to run into her again. I was going to ask her if she had a lighter, and then I was going to ask her if she had any information on room 3116. Eventually, she reappeared around the corner with her feisty little dog walking on its hind legs, strangling itself with the leash. Was leaned up on the wall next to the door I had snuck in weeks before, waiting to say my line. "Excuse me," I said. "Do you have a light?" She looked up with confusion, like a flashlight. She asked. I flashed my carton of cigarettes. "Oh, no honey, I've got asthma, sorry." "No problem," I muttered back. I tried to come up with anything else I could say so. I could eventually segue into room 3116. Blanking, I simply stared ahead in disappointment. That's when I noticed the faded bloodstain on the sidewalk from the old man. I clicked my tongue. Terrible what happened, I muttered. The big coat lady turned around and saw what I was staring at, understanding immediately. I know. I'm up on the 13th floor and I heard the sound. She was slowly nodding and now staring at the old puddle of blood herself. I heard someone talking about how they already moved a new family into that unit he was in. Is that right? I asked, surprising myself. Oh no. I think they're letting it sit like they did with the last one, she said, my brow raised. I tried to not act like an insane person and scare her off. The last one? I asked hesitantly. Yeah, it was just a few months ago, or maybe it was a year now. But the young couple that lived right next door to him jumped out the window too. She said in a flat way. I could have fainted. I felt dizzy and clammy, but I tried to keep my calm demeanor. That is, wow, I'm pretty new to the building, so I hadn't heard. I resigned from my niceties, and my eyes went out of focus as my mind began jumping to its newest conclusion. Somewhere in my peripheral, I noticed the lady nodding and looking down at her scraggly dog. Well, it sure is hard out here these days, she said, breaking the silence. She shuffled through the heavy apartment door, which slammed behind her, startling me. Torn from my trance, I quickly retreated back to my apartment. Shit. What does this mean? That rolling square thing lives in that room, and what? Kills people in it and around it. Do the people kill themselves? Does the thing? Maybe inject them with something that makes them, I don't know, suicidal? Or maybe they go crazy and just jump? I was thinking like a fucking lunatic. Like one of the cracked out vagrants wandering through the abandoned motels back in my hometown. I tried to slow myself down, but now I'd been given perfect evidence to suit my paranoid suspicions. At first, I was just trying to solve this complex series of events. Then I remembered I was involved. I remembered the switch plays a role in this whole thing. The light switch in my home theater. How far can it move? How far? Could it cross the street and climb the stairs and break in? Maybe it's quiet, or maybe it has some kind of way to silently open my door so I don't notice. So the neighbors don't notice. I found myself back in the home theater with some cheap whiskey in a plastic bottle. I sipped on it and enjoyed the aromatic sting that made me slowly feel braver with every gulp. I looked up at the 31st floor. Across the street, the lights were still on in room 3116. They're probably just cleaning it out. You need to calm yourself. None of this is your problem. I felt better and braver still with every new swig of the cruel whiskey. At some point, I hovered my hand over the light switch. The dwindling sobriety in me said no. The courageous drunken me said, I'm just curious. My sight was beginning to sharpen and blur, and I could tell I was swaying as I stood in front of those windows. I was drunk enough to where I felt like an observer of a faded memory from the past. I was drunk enough to where any action felt insignificant and all would be fine because nothing mattered. I flipped the switch, expecting the lights of room 3118 to blink on. The lights in room 3116 turned off instead. Shit. I don't know why. But seeing those lights turn off made me duck and hide below the window. I felt like I woke the rolling thing up and now it could see me. Shit. It moved. It fucking moved. Logic and reasoning was now out the window. The lights magically switched rooms, and I can only imagine it's because the square rolling thing now occupied, or will now materialize inside of room 3116. I continued hiding and thinking horrible thoughts to myself. I then did something I would never done had I not been wasted. I grabbed a hammer and smashed that fucking light switch. I smashed it into a million pieces and then smashed those pieces into dust. I'm sure my neighbors were fuming, but I had been quiet as a church mouse up until tonight. Both room 3118 and 3116 now had no lights on, and I had made the drunken assumption that now they were both safe. This all began when I turned the lights on in 3180. Now the lights would stay off forever, and I made sure of it. Clearly, I didn't have the self-control to stop myself from tinkering with this unknown thing. I doubt anyone else who would live here would have much more discipline. So I smashed the fucking switch into a million pieces. It wasn't long before I blacked out. Something woke me up hours later. It was deep into the night. I was still in the home theater and still drunk, but now also hungover. I tried to pull it together enough to figure out what woke me. I had thought it was a loud sound, but maybe it wasn't. The air felt like something loud had just occurred, but that was just a feeling, maybe one of paranoia. I looked out the window and half expected to see another person or persons lying smashed on the ground after diving off the 31st floor, but I saw no such horror. Both 3,118 and 3116's lights were still off. I rubbed my eyes and looked around. The pitch black room. I felt my blood freeze. There was a light on in my apartment. I could see the thin sliver of yellow illuminating underneath the door of the home theater it's in. I wanted to run at first, but then I wanted to sit still and just listen. So I sat there waiting for something. Maybe it was waiting for me to make a move. Then I heard it, muffled, maybe in the kitchen, rolling. Finally, I could hear the sound in finer detail. The wheels sounded heavy, like the sound of a stone tomb opening. The cheap hardwood floor buckled and cracked underneath those giant rolling wheels, which must have moved extremely slow and calculated, as if it was listening for my heartbeat. I was frozen with fear and confused. So confused. What kind of nightmare has my life become? I wanted to try and make a break for it. I thought about running as fast as I could down my awful hallway and ripping that front door open. It was only a few quick strides away. I sat up a little too quickly. Adrenaline was kicking in. A spring in the shitty secondhand recliner. I had passed out on popped, causing an insignificant yet audible click throughout the house. Rolling followed. It was very slow. So slow that one's ear could lose the deep droning tone after long enough to background noise. I slowly sat back, and the recliner crinkled ever so softly. The thing made a noise so intentionally imperceptible I could hardly make it out, a metallic sliding sound. The sound of a door's latch being methodically opened. It was leaving the kitchen, and maybe it was moving onto one of the other doors now. The yellow sliver of light went out, and the apartment was now totally dark. Rolling persisted, and I was barely able to perceive the noise. I spent the next few minutes sliding off my recliner with the precision of prey, which I undoubtedly had become. 30 minutes could have passed before I had crawled close enough to see under the door's crack. I carefully positioned my left eye to where I could see out into the black hallway just enough dot something impossibly dark. Darker than the natural blackness of night. It was just sitting in the hall, waiting. It was large and boxy, just like that silhouette in 3,118. It looked to almost perfectly fit the dimensions of the hall, leaving me sealed in. I'm dead. Maybe not. Maybe I can call the police or something and distract it. Doubt it'd kill them though. Right? Then I'd be a murderer maybe? Or maybe it would roll away. Maybe it isn't bulletproof. I can't have anyone else's blood on my hands. Maybe. I can start a fire somehow and then the fire department will be able to rescue me from the window. Maybe that's the stupidest thought I've ever had. Too much noise. I can't make any noise. I can't make a sound or it'll come get me. My thoughts were so frantic and visceral. I feared even they would make a sound which could be intercepted by the masterful listener sitting mere feet away. Another 30 minutes of eternity, and I had silently made my way towards the large windows. I was so cautious and so deliberate in my movements as to not touch the tiniest plastic shard on the ground from when I had drunkenly destroyed the light switch. Maybe I made it angry by doing that. Maybe in breaking the switch, the thing reverted back to me. Or maybe I exposed myself to it when I smashed that switch. I tried to use my phone and call for help. Text for help. Fucking email for help. None of it was going through. That damn rolling demon must have jammed my signal somehow. I ran out of hope. I froze in place. Eventually, I just started to write all of this. I'm still in the home theater, typing all of this out on my phone. As quietly as I can, even sipping the last of my whiskey with the most delicate swigs one could imagine. This whole thing is rather bleak, and I apologize if you stumble across this. I've scheduled this post to go up in 8 hours, maybe by Then the thing will have left, and my final words will get out into the world to be forgotten or laughed at. I'm sure you think I'm insane, or maybe I'm just a liar, and that's okay. I know what happened here tonight. I don't know or why any of this happened, but I know the rolling thing outside my door is real. I don't know why it's here, what its motivation is, if it's man-made or some impersonation of something we'd engineer, or maybe it's the very muse of humanity's chase for right angles and industrial design. I now understand how those people in room 3108 and 3116 left their fate on the cracked pavement below. I think it wants me to kill myself. Either that, or it's totally content with me killing myself. It's had me trapped in this room for hours. Now, it could have barged in and flattened me at any point, but it hasn't yet. Funny how this all started in this damn extra room of mine. Funny how these windows are the ideal design and size for me to throw myself from this hellish place. I don't know anymore. At this point, I'm just trying to buy time and sip more whiskey before the inevitable. I had been distracted in writing this for a few hours, and even began to have hope that when the sun came up, the thing would roll away. All I'd need is a few minutes to get out. I don't think I'm so lucky, though. The sky is beginning to brighten into a deep blue, and onk again I hear that steady Y rolling. So slow and meticulous, he must only be moving a centimeter every 15 minutes. The whiskey is doing job, and it's becoming hard to type, harder to maintain literacy. I thank Thy. I'll wrap this up here. I'm sorry, Vale. I can only hope. This is scene, and if you did see this, I thank you for keeping me company. In a way, the sun's almost up. I hear rolling and it's close. The view from the window is very nice. It's looking like a nice day. I hope it is a nice day. Everyone did it. Carson, Dare, Leo, and I were all bored to death that summer in our small, sleepy corner of suburbia. The worst day of my life took place just before we went our separate ways. It was late May, right after our high school graduation, and we were all antsy to get the hell out of Hayfield. Now, I would give anything to go back. One afternoon, the four of us were sprawled out on Gare's back porch, sipping cold sodas and yapping on about nothing as we often would on those hot, muggy days when no one felt like moving. It was Carson's idea. We need to go swimming, she declared suddenly, not lifting her head from my lap. Chloe, let's take your truck. All the usual conversation topics had been worn out by then. We decided that Leo would make the coolest grandpa. Gare had the most game, I was the best getaway driver, and that we would throw Carson to the zombies first in the event of an apocalypse. So we agreed. It was time to get out. The drive to the falls was baking hot, but it became more bearable once I got the janky AC going and turned up the radio. As we left Hayfield proper, the usual signals didn't carry, so I switched it to some random oldies station and let it play. Gare sang along in his pitchy but charming way. Come on, baby. Don't fear the Reaper. Baby, take my hand, until the tune was entirely eaten by static dot. We all knew Gare played up his lover boy persona to get us laughing. He used to be so shy. And that moment, I was struck by how good it was to see him grab the spotlight. Over those 4 years, we'd all done some growing up in our own ways. I thought Dot as the song faded into garbled fuzz. We could hear bits of other signals bleeding through Dot. It was then clear as day that a man's voice on the radio said, "Fall." Nothing but static followed. No one mentioned it. Looking back, I'm not sure if anyone else even heard it. I turned the radio off. I think that's when we started playing Truth, or Dare. If you chose Dare, Carson explained, you would be given a special mystery dare once we reached the falls. Gare and Leo both chose Dare. I chose Truth. Have you ever kissed anyone? Carson asked from her place in the passenger seat. I kept my eyes on the road, but I could hear her grinning through the words. I hadn't. I also didn't want to sound like a total virgin. Yeah, who? I made a sharp turn as the winding rural road bent violently to the left. Gare fell almost all the way onto Leo's lap. The two of them packed into the truck's tiny backseat space. Leo cussed, rubbing his forehead where it had collided with Gare's. They laughed like fools at this. You wouldn't know them, I lied. They already graduated. They? Carson pressed. I'd clearly set myself up for more interrogation. That's what I said, I replied, without looking at Carson. I wasn't giving her more ammunition. She let out a dissatisfied huff, but turned her attention to the road instead as it changed from pavement into dirt. We were almost there. That thin dirt road through the woods soon opened up into a small makeshift parking area, which usually turned into a soup of mud in the rainy season. Today, it was mostly dry. It was also completely empty. This was strange for a typical summer afternoon. The place was secluded, sure, but it was still a hot spot for just about every student in Alum. Hayfield High. Sweet, we've got the place to ourselves, said Gare, wiggling his eyebrows. You know what that means, ... Gross, Carson said, with mock disgust, yanking Dare's baseball cap down over his eyes. Carson and I hopped out onto the dirt first, then shoved the front seats forward to let the guys clamber out. Next, we stripped down to our bathing suits and sprayed every inch of our bodies with bug spray. That was just protocol around here to ward away the constant plague of mosquitoes and horseflies that it was a short hike to the promised land. We picked our way through the dense forest, pushing aside clumps of brambles and wisteria. It looked almost like a tunnel, the way the vines choked the trees and curled into each other above our heads. Bits of Spanish moss hung down from low oak boughs, prickling my skin as I trudged along. The air was thick here, peaty and sweet as the rushing of the falls grew closer. A hush fell over the four of us, as if these were hallowed grounds. Looking back, I think they were Incruenta Falls. No one knew why they called it that, but everyone agreed that's what it was called. The entrance used to have an informational plaque tacked onto a wooden post, but it had long since fallen down and worn away. Taking its history with it, the falls themselves were pretty, but not anything to write home about, just shelves of rock. Stacked around 20 feet high, frothy fresh water trickled down into a round swimming hole, surrounded by flat boulders that were the ideal size and shape for spreading out towels and picnic blankets. The water was a translucent dark brown. It always reminded me of oversteep tea. When the trees parted, Gare sprinted past us and took a flying leap into the hole with a whoop, disappearing beneath the surface. Leo took off running after him, executing a perfect cannonball that splashed. Carson, and our towels. That's it, you're dead. Carson dropped the thing she was carrying and jumped in to exact her vengeance. I was left with our stuff. I soon found a good wide rock jutting out into the water and began unfolding an old blanket as Gare swam over. The last one in is a rotten egg, he said, leaning on the rock with his elbows. And you're getting rottener by the minute, Chloe. I splashed him in the face. As I did, I noticed something. The water felt weirdly warm, like a hot bath. My fingertips tingled. Soon my entire hand felt numb, like static. I jerked it away. No one else seemed bothered. So all I said was, okay, just give me a minute. I need more bug spray. But as I said this, I noticed something else. I could not see or feel a single insect in the air. Normally, the place was teeming with small clouds of gnats, water bugs, dragonflies, and, of course, the ever-present mosquitoes. And horseflies. It was an entire ecosystem unto itself. Today, the swimming hole was in utter stasis. I don't know what else to say other than that it was deeply wrong. I found myself wondering if we'd taken a wrong turn. It felt so foreign, like a completely different place from the one I'd spent so many summers hanging around. No, the same cobbled signpost had been there. I was sure of it. Why was everything so dead? I did notice a few abandoned towels scattered about on the rocks. It was at least comforting to know that people had recently been here. Seeing this, I tried to push the thought from my mind, but I could not bring myself to get into the water just yet. At some point, someone brought up the game again. Carson and I dared Leo to jump from a thick oak branch overhanging the deepest part of the hole. He scrambled up the slick bark without a second thought. Fall. My heart lurched. The voice from the radio played in my head over and over, but Leo kept his balance. He stood straight up on the branch proudly and pointed at us with an exaggerated wink. Then he jumped, I held my breath, waiting for Leo to resurface. We waited for a long, measured moment, and I remember thinking how I'd never forgive myself if something terrible happened. Leo broke the surface with a gasp. He hauled himself out of the water, collapsing onto the rock belly up. He was laughing, but he seemed different. You good? I asked. He met my eyes and for that split second seemed panicked. I've never seen him so terrified. Yeah, what a rush, Leo breathed. He stood, turning away from me. Gare, you're up next, man. Carson dared Gare to climb the falls. Leo seconded this idea. I chose to remain silent. I wish I hadn't. Gare folded his arms and squinted up at the stack of rock. How far are we talking? He asked, eyeing the challenge. All the way? It's okay. If you're scared, Carson said with that saccharine smile of hers. Hell no, Gare said, and began to climb Dot as he did. I turned to Leo. Again, I asked if he was okay. He shrugged, not taking his eyes off of Gare, who was slowly picking his way up the slimy first shelf of the falls. Leo finally opened his mouth. I think there are people down there. My stomach churned. I searched his face for some sign of a joke. He looked down at me, stone-faced, as if daring me to call his bluff. They tried to take me. That's when Gare fell. Carson gave a sort of strangled yelp as our friend missed his foothold and teetered backwards, slipping into empty air. Fall. That word kept repeating in the back of my mind. I swear. It took forever for Gare to hit the water. I can still picture. His body floating there in the air, headfirst with no hope of bracing for impact. Leo screaming his name from the shore. I felt like I should have somehow predicted this outcome, and yet I'd done nothing to stop it. Gare was swallowed up by the black water of Incredible Falls. We waited and waited, doubt he did not resurface. The thing that has always bothered me most about Gare's death is this. They never found a body. I remember hearing that the recovery team dug up nothing but mud from the bottom of that swimming hole. Dot. There was no casket at his funeral. Afterwards, Carson, Leo, and I sort of lost touch. It just wasn't the same without Gare. I've been trying to record everything I can remember about that day. Now that a few years have gone by, I feel like I can think about it again without spiraling into depression. Maybe if I finally get it all out, I can put it behind me for good. I recently asked my parents about the whole Gare situation to confirm the details. They had no idea who I was talking about. I've checked the newspaper archives, public records, even drove by his parents' house. It was foreclosed. It doesn't feel like my friend died a violent death. It feels like he never existed. He simply faded away. Looking back on those years and knowing I can't call up any of those friends today, it feels like we all did. I've tried to get in touch with Carson and Leo again. Neither of them seem to be on social media at all. Nothing comes up in search results. When I type their names, all I know is that they don't live in Hayfield anymore. At the risk of sounding too crazy, it's like somehow that Blackwater washed them out of this world too, on a different, happier day at the falls. As the four of us skipped stones and passed around a bottle of cheap wine, Carson posed a question. What? Does incongruent mean anyway? She'd asked idly, taking a long swig from the bottle. It's when something's bloodless, Leo had answered, chucking a huge stone into the water. It sank instantly, barely leaving a splash in its wake, like a war with no bloodshed. Gare had laughed at this. Sounds like every day to me, he'd said. I've always wondered what he meant by that. An update. I woke up this morning, reached for my alarm, and felt that something had been lost. There was no trace of damage at all. Just a clean, smoothed over absence beginning at my wrist, my left. Hand is gone. It seems that when I touched the water all those years ago, it took a part of me with it. Why now, after all this time? The man smiled, reaching once more for the bottle in front of him. He raised it to his lips, taking a long swig and wiping the foam from the corners of his unkempt mustache, before turning once more to me. After half an hour of conversation, it appeared as though something I'd said to the man had finally stirred up some interest. You mentioned a theophany. What's that? The gruff man asked. I reached down to his travel bag and wiped the still fresh dust from its buckles. Before pulling out a Bible, yes, sir, a theophany. It's not a word strictly associated with Jesus, but we mostly use it to describe times in the Old Testament when it's believed the Lord appeared in a physical form. Before he was born in Bethlehem, are you familiar with the story of Jacob? How he wrestled with God? The man took another sip from his rapidly emptying bottle, nodding wordlessly as he did so. Well, that's a theophany. We know he struggled with the man until morning, when the man revealed himself to be the Lord, or an angel of the Lord. Anyhow, a lot of scholars believe that mentions of the angel of the Lord are Jesus himself anyways. What do you think? I studied his expression for any sign of interest. I had visited towns where hardly a soul could tell the difference between Moses and Noah, but had never yet met a man like the bulky, haggard figure beside me who already seemed not only immensely knowledgeable of Scripture, but wholly uninterested. The man shifted in his chair, scratching his roughened chin before calling the bartender over for another beer. After several moments of silence, he spoke once again to me. The original language refers to the man as Elohim, which many translate to mean Big G, God. Elohim really just means a god, a heavenly being. I think it was an angel. He wrestled with. Not that ain't impressive, mind you. The man took another sip of beer. What about that, the burning bush? I raised an eyebrow. What about it? Well, just a thought, I guess. I met someone a few years back. A real smart fella. He told me he believed that when Moses spoke to God through the burning bush, he was talking to Jesus. Same thing when God comforted Elijah on the mountain, that it was Jesus. Well, in a way, yes. We hold Jesus and the Father to be two distinct persons, but both the same God. The man chuckled. No, I mean like they were speaking to Christ himself after he was born. When Jesus went up on the mountain for the transfiguration, Moses and Elijah appeared with him and they talked to him, right? He thought maybe since God is bigger than time, he could be both then and now all at once. His idea was that one. They appear in the New Testament. It's the same conversation that he's having with each of them back in the Old Testament too. I furrowed my brow, leaning back into my chair. That's a unique thought. I don't know how much water it holds scripturally, but I must say it's creative, at least. The two of us sat in silence for a while, content not to trouble each other any longer with speculation or trivia. It was late into the evening, then, and more weary patrons had begun to stumble into the small bar, tired from a long day's labor, not long after the last beams of orange sunlight slipped through the shuttered blinds. A small commotion began. Outside, I heard shouting and the screech of tires, and after a few seconds, the wooden front door burst open with a clatter. A man, disheveled and sweating, took a second to lean against the doorframe. His face was red and glistening, and he was deeply out of breath. After collecting himself, he looked across the room towards two elderly police officers who had been hunched playing cards at a small table. I recognized the elder of the two to be the sheriff, a man named Emerson with whom I'd made acquaintance. That afternoon, the red-faced man at the entrance called out to the sheriff and his deputy. The distinct twang of panic caught between his haggard breaths. They found him, Sheriff. The McBride boy. They found him out in the field. The sheriff had already begun to put on his coat, moving quickly towards the exit. I sat in my seat, watching the situation unfold for several moments before realizing that every other person in the small room was also rushing out the door. I turned my head to my burly drinking partner, expecting in him the same urgency, but found instead the man moved slowly. Beneath his rough skin and unkempt beard, his expression was grim as he paid his tab and trudged out the door in pursuit of the curious mob. I collected my things once more into my dusty travel bag and left the bar, stepping out into the dim moonlight. I looked out across the highway, where the amassing crowd was already tearing through the wheat fields in a frenzy, flashlights in hand as their red-faced messenger led them onwards. Penno Crossing was incredibly small back then. The township was entirely bisected by its defining interstate highway from which it clung to tightly. Across the highway to the west, where I now faced, were the majority of the local farms. When I had rode into town on the Greyhound bus that morning, I thought that in the blistering sunlight, The fields of wheat and corn seemed infinite in their breadth, stretching out into nothingness dot on the eastern side. The small collection of stores, bars, and municipal buildings arranged themselves as almost a perfect row along the side of the highway. Behind them lay several houses and a few small livestock farms, clustered closely to the rest of the infrastructure. Nested neatly in the middle of it all was a small chapel, once well cared for. Those days were evidently long since past, its white paint chipping and its windows cracked and dusted. It had been the decline of this church culminating with the sudden death of the former pastor that had led to me being sent to Pennell Crossing that very day as the replacement pastor. I spotted the large man slowly making his way across the highway. I hastened my step to catch up, and between panting breaths asked him if he knew the McBride family very well. I didn't know. I'm about as new around here as you are, just passing through. Oh, that explains why you're so well learned on the word. I reckon there ain't a seminary around here for 500 miles. Pardon me? By the way, I never caught your name. My name is Peter. Never went to preaching school, Peter. You can call me Nolan. The pair of us crossed the threshold of the wheat fields, the waist-high stalks of grain trampled under the feet of the crowd preceding us. In the ever-spreading carpet of amber ahead, all sound was muffled amidst the rhythmic rustling of the harvest in the wind. We continued in silence, following the faint lights quickly disappearing ahead further into the fields. Only when the distant wailing of a woman far ahead came to our ears did we quicken our step. When we caught up to the rest, they were clustered frantically around chaotic scene. Ahead, just a few feet, was a large green tractor. It rested at an odd angle, slanted dramatically as though on uneven ground. I looked at its base to find that its back tires lay nearly half submerged in the soil. Oddly, the ground on which it sat lay dry and undisturbed, as though the tires had simply sunken through the solid ground. Its operator, a Pennick man, sat leaning against its dusted metal frame, tears rolling down his tanned face as he spoke between sobbing breaths to the sheriff. I turned my attention away from the tractor to try to see what the crowd circled around. Several men stooped down, struggling to lift the crying woman to her feet. She kept shrugging their arms off, falling back to the ground, where she herself seemed to be struggling to pull something out of the soil. As I stepped closer, gently, pushing my way through the crowd, I saw the cause of distress, the lifeless body of the McBride child. At initial glance, it appeared as though only the upper half of the boy's body was present. I wondered, with sickening fear, if perhaps the boy had been run over by the tractor. I observed as the woman, whom I would soon learn to be the boy's mother, once again grabbed the child's small arm, trying to lift him up. The realization came that the boy's body, much like the sunken tires of the tractor, was half buried in the soil, with arms and head outstretched as though he had attempted to claw his way out of the dirt, when Mrs. McBride was finally pulled. Away from her child, Nolan began instructing some of the others to start digging out the boy's body. The red-faced man who had burst into the bar stepped back, eyeing Nolan with curiosity and suspicion before turning to speak to the sheriff. I watched in awe as the boy's body was quickly removed, the soil around his legs collapsing back in, on itself as though he had simply displaced the earth. Sheriff Emerson walked up beside me, letting out a heavy sigh as the pair watched. I hope you'll forgive the chaos around here, Reverend. My eyes didn't leave the unfolding scene, watching as the boy's mother swooped in to cradle her son's body. What did the farmhand say? How did this happen? Poor kid got stuck, hopped out to take a look, and tripped over the boy. A hell of a thing to find. He'll be all right in a few days, though. As Mrs. McBride clung to her child, she hugged his limp body tight, squeezing him. As she did, a sputter of water was pushed out of the boy's lungs, spilling onto the ground. The crowd stepped back in shock as the mother sobbed ever louder. As the last of the water dripped out of the boy's pale lips, my nose curled. In the air, just for a passing moment, a harsh, chemical scent wafted by. It passed nearly as soon as it arrived. Nolan stepped back from the scene, dusting his rough hands off on his coat. I looked at him and saw inklings of teardrops forming in the creased corners of his eyes. Nolan mouthed something to himself in disbelief before turning to me and saying it aloud. He drowned. The boy's funeral was quiet, even for such a little town. I sat silent in the back row, daring not to interrupt the already painfully awkward service. The child had been the youngest of 6. His siblings and mother sat in the front row, their sniffling echoing through the near-empty chapel, while their father gave a poorly rehearsed eulogy. I, now technically Pendle Crossing spiritual leader, had offered to perform the funeral myself. I had been gently declined by the McBride family, who felt the service should be performed by those who had known Benjamin in life, not only in death. Although understanding, I couldn't help but feel the slight sting of rejection from the members of my new congregation. I hoped that these people would soon come to trust me, even amidst the tragedy I emerged into. Within 20 minutes, the service was over and the small body was removed to be driven to the burial site, which I also declined, to attend to respect the privacy of the mourners. Once the small crowd had tearfully shuffled out, I walked out of the chapel and prayed silently that my next time attending my new place of work would not be another funeral. I crossed the side road, walking over to the dilapidated motel next door to the bar, in which I'd stayed the last few nights and would likely keep staying in until a more permanent residence was made available. Standing outside the bar were Nolan, Sheriff Emerson, and the red-faced man from the bar. The 3 of them seemed to be deep in a heated discussion, one that I could tell was only intensifying as he made his approach. I'm sure you had nothing to do with this, Nolan, but you know the bind I'm in? We try to welcome newcomers like yourself here, but if Clark here saw you out in the fields the night the kid was found, I at least have to bring you in for some questions. Nolan crossed his arms firmly, leaning against the wall as I approached. I understand that, Emerson, but we can do that right here. As I understand it, you and the deputy are the only officers in town anyways. So what good would it do to bring me into the station? I'll answer any questions you have right here. The red-faced man, Clark, scoffed and turned to protest too. The sheriff but was interrupted by me. Excuse me for interrupting y'all, but am I understanding there's some suspicion in the death? I can vouch for Nolan the afternoon the body was found, at least. We were in the bar speaking that evening, and before that he'd been sitting at the bar since about noon. Clark turned to me, his brow furrowed in frustration. He might have been, but I saw him out in those fields the night before that, when the kid went missing. He was just standing out there, a little bit past where the body was found. I looked over to Nolan, who scoffed. I weren't nowhere near there, Sheriff. I can't prove it to you, but maybe you should start asking Clark why he was also out in the fields when the kid went missing, and why he didn't bring it up until now. Clark slammed a shaking fist against the wall where Nolan leaned. Because I, unlike you, live here and work these fields like everyone else. It's my livelihood. You, on the other hand, have barely left the bar since you showed up, except to stand out there in the field the night he went missing. Sheriff Emerson pulled Clark back away. Nolan, you quit that and calm yourself down. Mr. Carver does bring up a good point. If you saw him out there that night, why didn't you say anything? It ain't a crime to stand out. Bear, I thought you were a new farmhand. It wasn't until I found out later that you weren't, and that's where the kid was. I had no reason to be suspicious until the body was found, Sheriff. I'm telling you, this man's as guilty as sin. I sat back, daring not to interrupt once more as the 3 men continued to argue. Eventually, after some heavy persuasion and the threat of arrest, Nolan agreed to accompany the elderly sheriff back to the station, provided Clark did not come with. This left a visibly angry Clark alone with me, feeling extraordinarily awkward and out of place in the situation. The 2 of us sat in a tense quiet for several minutes, leaning against the wooden walls of the old bar and watching the amber fields sway in the wind across the highway. Finally, I spoke up. Clark, was it? I don't think we've been officially introduced yet. Name's Peter. I'm the new preacher. I know who you are. Clark chuckled between gritted teeth. Ain't no one been here dressed like you since Reverend John died back in May. Ah, well, I'm sorry to have come in the middle of such a troubling time. The death of a child, especially in the way it went, ain't ever easy. Clark's expression softened a bit. Sorry, Peter. It ain't nothing around here, if I'm honest. Shit happens all the time. Livestock dies. Folks die. Kids die too. Just the way it goes, I guess. I raised an eyebrow, turning to face him. This happens often. Clark stiffened, looking uncomfortable. Well, it's not always that bad, but yeah. Folks out here are pretty used to losing people and not always getting the answers they're wanting. Your buddy, though, Nolan, he's hiding something. Maybe. Not that he's a killer, but something. If that something could get the McBride family some of the answers they're hurting for, good. I sat back, thinking for a moment. I wouldn't call him my buddy, you know. I met the man just a few days ago. Clark turned, stepping away from the wall and walking into the bar. Well, then maybe you should be a bit more careful who you vouch for. The next few days were well spent trying to restore the small chapel to some resemblance of a holy place. It was difficult to believe that the decay had crept in so rapidly in a short few months since Reverend John's death. Likely, the paint had been peeling for years, the dust collecting in corners unswept for far too long. I made my best effort to clean every nook and cranny I could get to in the sanctuary before I would bother trying the lost key to the back office. It was the sanctuary, after all, where I'd hoped to reunite the congregation of Pennell Crossing in worship. I dusted the windowsills, straightened the hymnals in the backs of the pews, and swapped broken light bulbs for new ones. By Friday, the small room was finally in a state that I considered worthy of its purpose. By happenstance, a visitor came to the chapel that same evening. The woman, dressed in a pale blue dress and holding a toddler to her hip, walked through the door while I was collecting my personal effects to begin settling into the back office. I stood up to meet her, holding an outstretched hand to shake her own. The woman looked apprehensively at my hand for a moment, as though debating whether to shake it or not. She shook her head as though clearing some unwanted thought before relinquishing a small smile and introducing herself. You must be Peter. I'm sorry we haven't had the chance to be introduced yet. I'm Ellen, and this is my son Micah. I smiled back. It's a pleasure to meet you both, Ma. I'm just getting things ready for the Sunday service. I wish I'd had the time to clean it up more before the funeral, but in the state it was in. I trailed off, noticing a visual discomfort growing in Ellen's face. I am sorry. I'm sure you don't want to hear about the mess or the funeral. What brings you in here today? Her creased cheeks softened once more, and she used her free hand to fish a set of keys out of her handbag. I take it you haven't opened the back office yet, but you'll need these to get in. It'll still be locked. I forgot Emerson had them. I hesitantly took the rusted key ring from her. Hand? Well, thank you, miss. If you don't mind me asking, why'd Emerson have them? Her face scrunched with confusion. Because of the crime scene? Crime scene? What crime scene? Her eyes went wide. No one told you? She reached out her arm, indicating she wanted the keys. I handed them back and followed her as she led him into the short corridor behind the pulpit leading to the preacher's office. She set Micah down on the warped wooden floor for a moment while she fidgeted with the key, struggling to fit it into the rusted keyhole. Finally, as the lock clicked open, she picked up her son once more. I don't want to go back in there. I'm so sorry they didn't tell you yet. I'm sure Emerson can help you clean up if anything. If there's still some mess left, goodbye, Pastor. With another uncomfortable smile, Ellen left the small chapel, leaving me with the keys and the burning fusion of curiosity and terror for what I'd find on the other side. After a short prayer, I pulled open the creaking door, met by torn police. Tape hastily strewn across the threshold. As I ducked underneath, the strong smell of iron stung his nose. I looked around at the cluttered office and was taken aback by the sight before me. By all accounts, most of the room was as one would expect for a small town pastor. Dusted bookshelves lined the walls, completely filled with all manner of different biblical translations and theological texts. A desk stood in the center of the room, still cluttered with planners, papers, and pens. In the middle of the room, however, was evidently the crime scene that Ellen had spoken about. A crater had formed in the middle of the floorboards, a hole of warped and charred wood as though something had ruptured from beneath the floor. Shards of wood littered the whole of the office, many of which burnt and splintered, some even lodged into the ceiling above. Caked onto the front of the desk, floor, and ceiling alike near the center of the room was a substantial splattering of dried blood. I stepped around the hole, my puzzled mind racing for any explanation. The only one I could muster, the one that I feared the most, lodged itself firmly in my brain as I made my way around the backside of the desk. An attack, a small-scale bombing directed at the previous pastor. I allowed himself one minor sin and swore under my breath, cursing my superiors for intentionally keeping these details from me, so as not to scare me away from the position dot. As I looked over Pastor John's desk, I scanned the various documents. Many of them were obituaries, invitations to funerals from months prior. Clark had been right. It seemed death was a common happening in Pendle Crossing. I had been looking at the documents for several minutes before the picture on the desk caught my eye. The small framed photo placed at the corner of the desk seemed to be a photo of Pastor John with his family. Clinging to his leg was a small toddler, and at his other side was a loving wife, both of whom I recognized. I swore once more, frustrated at myself for not realizing earlier that Ellen and Micah were Pastor John's wife and son. The Chihuahuan Desert is as inhospitable as it is vast. I drove through my last small town an hour or two before and hadn't passed a car in 30 minutes. The only noises accompanying me on my journey was the hum of my vintage Cadillac I'd just picked up in San Antonio and the occasional squawk of a turkey vulture overhead. The radio was busted, not that I cared all that much. I preferred to be alone with my thoughts, especially when driving. The dust bites like a rattlesnake out here, and seeing it creep into the car's dark paint job almost brought a tear to my eye. I can remember that day clearly. The sun was high in a cloudless sky and beating down relentlessly on everything below it. Beads of sweat dripped like a busted faucet down my brow, forcing me to squint. The barely paved road was desolate, and by this point in the day, it felt like I hadn't seen another car in hours. Or anything, for that matter. Even the cacti had petered out. Either side of me lay a landscape of orange and beige, dotted with dying shrubs and otherworldly rock formations. Very little called the cracked soil home. Scorpions, snakes, and insects, bordering on alien. Buzzards fed on the hardiest of mammals who tried to stick it out. Whether it was a rabbit, a wolf, or a human being, they'd all be reduced to a scattering of bleach-white bones. Still, this patch of land had a road running through it for a reason, which I was reminded of when I saw a gas station up ahead. It began as a pinprick on the horizon, enlarging as I drew nearer. There was a certain haze to the building, an illusion of the heat. I left a trail of dust in my wake as I pulled into the mirage. Parking by the pumps, which had a no gas sign hanging about them, I swung my car door open and let my boots hit the sand. The heat struck immediately. It was oppressive and blistering, but bearable if you'd been raised in it. I straightened my spine with a crack and looked around. The building looked derelict. The windows covered in faded advertisements were cracked and stained, and set into crumbling masonry. From further up the road, I saw that a small home had been tacked on behind the gas station. Surrounding the structure was a collection of a dozen or so cars, rusted and ruined. Accompanying them was discarded furniture, anything from a rotting wooden closet to an old washing machine. The place was a dump, and the makeshift animal bone decor dangling from every overhang only made it more repulsive. Then again, it wasn't like I had a choice of where to stop off. I gritted my teeth, passed under the bison's skull above the entrance, and stepped inside. The counter was unmanned, and the store was barren. I walked in and made my way between the shelves, each stacked with a handful of goods. A dozen cans of beans here, a few bottles of sauce there. An unplugged freezer was nestled in the far corner. It had an awful smell wafting from it. There was a rack to my right with a few unrecognizable brands of candy stocked on it. Looking closely, I realized the small black stains that covered them. Colorful packaging was in fact a colony of ants. I glanced down the aisle, taking it all in. My grandmother's pantry was more well-stocked than this place, and she's dead. What can I do you for? Called a warm voice from behind me. I whirled around. There was a man standing behind the counter, his hands resting on the dusty wooden top. His skin was a sickly pale, punctuated by a deathly blue hue. He wore a yellowing vest, stained with oil and sweat. As I approached the store's dank checkout, I saw that he was wearing a tattered pair of jeans. He had a faded feed cap covering scraggly strands of gray hair. His face, like the rest of him, had been through the ringer. His eyes alternated between beady and bulging. His fat, hawkish nose was bent into the shape of a question mark, and he had fewer teeth than I could count on my fingers. He seemed to be proud of what blackened teeth he had left, though, as he grinned hideously. I was wondering if you had a map I could take a look at, I said. A map? Huh? Sure, he replied. What kind? State map, road map. Just one of the local area, please. I asked Dot. Suddenly he yelled, shocking me into taking a step back. Plum, bring me the small map. Shouted the man behind the counter. There was no response. For a second we just looked at each other in silence. The name's Hank, by the way, said the man as he wiped his nose on his wrist before holding out his hand to shake mine. I returned the gesture reluctantly and told him my name. Not my real one, of course, but it was the polite thing to do. It was followed with more silence as I awkwardly stood in front of him, trying to look anywhere but the growth under his eyelid. I felt a craving starting to build up in me and saw the rack of gum by the counter. Impressively, it was ant-free. I grabbed a packet of apple-flavored chewing gum and slid it across to Hank. I'll take this too, I said. Hank nodded. That'll be... He paused for a long second before saying, as if it was a question, 5 cents. 5 cents. I parroted, surprised. Sorry, said Hank when he saw my reaction. I meant 45 cents. I took out a crumpled dollar bill and handed it to him. He took it from me and folded it into his antique register, then plucked out the right change, which he deposited into my palm. As I put the gum in the back pocket of my levies, the old door to our left creaked open. A girl shyly walked in. Who? Couldn't have been more than 9 or 10. She had a white dress on, the hem covered in mud and sand. Her skin was a perfect shade of white, and her hair wasn't far behind. She glanced at me with raw, pink eyes as she handed a map to Hank. You Plum, he said, putting her shoulder. She turned and wandered back through the door. Hank unfurled the map, spreading it out in front of us. It was basic, showing a small section of highways and byways that cut through the surrounding desert. Hank's cruciform pendant dinked against the counter as he leaned, hunchback flared, over it. He poked a finger at me as he slumped forward. Why? Are you heading by here anyhow? He asked, gruffly. We don't get much folks coming through nowadays. Business, I replied. When Hank realized that was all he was getting in the way of an answer, he relented and leaned back. I thanked him dryly and inspected the map closely. The first thing I noticed was a small red line drawn through one of the roads. In the far corner, a particularly desolate stretch of land was marked by a red pen scrawled in the shape of an X. I pressed my finger down on this spot of the map and looked at Hank. What's that about? I asked him in earnest. Suddenly and furiously. He pounded his meaty fist down on the counter, causing the various jars and knickknacks laying across it to shake. Spittle flew from the corner of his cracked lips as he spoke. Don't you fucking... Think about it, you Yankee fuck. Roared the inbred. I took a cautious step back. Hey man, I was just asking. I yelled back. What followed was a quick and intense staring contest. Hank suddenly moved as if he was about to come out from behind the counter. As soon as he did, I got out of there, kicking the decrepit front door open and almost off its rusted hinges. I trudged out, stirring up dust as I speed walked back to my car. The little girl, Plum, was sitting on the ground across the gas pumps. An old umbrella was stabbed into the dirt in front of her, masking her in shade. She looked away from the dead rattlesnake she was playing with and watched me as I slammed the driver's side door shut. I pulled out as Hank walked hurriedly towards me. I began down the road and saw that he'd stopped in the middle of the tarmac. Behind me, a small cloud of sand swirling around him. "Careful, stranger," he screamed as I drove off. "It's egg frying hot out there. I'm not fond of rural America. Sure, there's the occasional quaint mom and pop shop that offers a free slice of apple pie with every purchase, but they felt few and far between. It's a shame. I can remember thinking as I drove that my job often led me out to the boondocks. Not that the cities were much better, but they never claimed otherwise. I've never heard of someone being shocked by a bad encounter in a place like Spartanburg. But out here, a certain plastic kindness is expected. Rarely, from my personal experiences, it ever found. I was going to the Red X, an area where anyone passing through is told expressly not to go, felt perfect. And I had commit Hank's map to memory. Once I was far enough away from that gas station, and sure he wasn't following me in the old pickup I saw parked next to the building, I pulled up on the side of the road. I opened my glove compartment and took out my own folded road map of that state. I traced the marked roads, finding my location and working out my position in relation to Hank's small scope map. I found the spot, sans a few roads that I assumed were only known and used locally and were just dirt tracks by any other name. Because of this, I reasoned, they didn't make the cut for any official land survey. After some pondering and pen chewing, I felt pretty certain that I located the supposed forbidden area and marked it in myself. I put the map down on the passenger seat and started to drive. Over the next few hours, I passed 2 cars. Both times, I held my breath as they went by, waiting for them to stop and for Hank's entire extended and heavily armed family to pile out. That didn't happen, obviously, and I was left alive long enough to enjoy the wonderful scenery. The further I went, the more the full, desolate landscape became populated with strange and awesome rock formations. They stood at odd angles, like the furniture arrangement of some biblical giant. Some sprawled like massive petrified fungi. Others stood slender and small near the roadside, tricking my tired mind into imagining a desperate hitchhiker. As the sun dipped below the orange horizon, and a deep purple overtook the sky, these stationary travelers became more frequent. Some were geological features, others were cacti, but a few, I could have sworn, were neither, without GPS or really any. Road signs to work off, my journey consisted mostly of guesswork. Still, I was relatively certain I was in the right spot as I veered off the barely paved road and into the desert, praying to God to protect my bumper. My headlights pervasively revealed my surroundings as I drove further, crushing small shrubs beneath my wheels. Finally, I decided I was secluded enough. I braked, parking my car next to a small clearing of earth with little vegetation. I let the car run, lighting up the area. I swung the door open and stood up for the first time in hours. My back cracked in places I never imagined could as I stretched. After limbering, I opened the back door and leaned in. Retrieving the shovel laid out under the seat, slammed the door shut again, and walked to the back of the car. I popped the trunk and grimaced. The body had started to smell. It was to be expected. I can remember thinking, since it hit 100 degrees Fahrenheit on the journey out here. With that in mind, I was surprised that she hadn't been baked in that small metal compartment. The body was a woman in her 40s, I reckoned, with dyed blonde hair and a poor dress sense. I wasn't sure why she was killed or why they needed her to disappear so fast, but then again, I never was. Not that it mattered. I grabbed her, making sure to lift with my legs as I heaved the encumbering weight from its resting place. I set it down in the dust with a puff of my chest, and got to digging her grave. I'd been blessed with a patch of land free of hard-packed caliche. Instead, it was mostly loose topsoil and sand. This wasn't without an extra magnitude of difficulty, though. The cold night winds of the desert blew low-s into the slowly deepening hole. On top of this, loose sediment collapsed inwards every 2 minutes. The whole ordeal felt like taking a step forward and two back. Gradually, the hole began to widen. Soon, it was almost 3 feet deep. I thank God for not placing a layer of volcanic rock right beneath where I stood during his creation of the earth. Once it was at an acceptable depth, I set the shovel down and began to drag the corpse toward it, that it was cold, and stupidly I hadn't brought a jacket with me. Doing so felt needless considering the midday weather. Shivering, I dumped the body unceremoniously in the small pit. Still in the fetal position, I started to cover it up with the dry dirt piled around the opening. Eventually, there was no evidence of her existence other than a small bump in the ground. Satisfied, I threw my trusty shovel in the trunk, not wanting to get soil all over the leather seats. I closed and locked it and walked around to the front of the car. I took a packet of cigarettes and a lighter from the glove compartment and lit one up. I started to amble around the car as I smoked, that it really was a lovely part of the country. The moon was high in the sky now, and the rock formations were left as nothing but a silhouette, all depth and color lost, while visually the beauty had been dampened. I could clearly hear the vibrance of my surroundings. Coyotes howling, owls shrieking, and masses of insects buzzing singularly. All of this was tied together by the dull moan of the wind, swirling up clouds of fine shale around me as I walked. I met it with my own clouds of tobacco smoke, but it was no contest. Getting lost in the strange elegance of the Southwestern. The United States was as easy as getting lost there, physically. I suddenly became conscious of my absent-minded wandering. I dropped my cigarette and killed it under my boot heel. The car was about 30 yards away, easily visible thanks to blinding headlamps. As I started to walk towards it, a sudden stillness grasped the area. Listening out, I could hear, well, nothing, apart from the low hum of the engine. Frowning, I kept making my way towards the car. I reached the driver's side door, yanked it open, and collapsed inside with a sigh. I pinched the bridge of my nose. The beginnings of a migraine were starting to take hold. I exhaled again as I started to drive, the uneven ground making for a bumpy ride. I hadn't even reached the road when I saw it. Looking in my wing mirror, I saw someone standing over the grave. The figure was a featureless silhouette, made visible by the moonlight. I stopped the car and got out, squinting to see it better. Was it a mirage? A trick of the dim light? I could make out a head and arms hanging just apart from the torso. I was sure it was right where I had buried the body. I took a flashlight from the glove compartment, flicked a beam on high, and began to make my way toward the figure. Bright light wasn't kind to the foliage, which appeared as sickly green-gray weeds. I brushed past them as the figure came more in view. I strained my eyes to glean more detail until, suddenly, it disappeared. Like a tower being demolished, its humanoid form pancaked downwards and became a night. Hey, hey. I shouted. Unnerved, I picked up my pace until I was at the spot. I threw the light around me, but saw nothing other than the small patch of upheaved earth. Once I was sure no desert-dwelling hick had stumbled onto the burial site, I turned, constantly glancing over my shoulder, and walked back to the car. At this point, it was freezing. I could see my breath swirl in the air around me. The difference in temperature between midday and midnight was astounding. I started to wonder if it was a punishment. The fact that my boss gave me a car with busted air conditioning for this job. I chuckled to myself, sending another cloud of freezing vapor out around me. My flashlight's beam finally cast itself over the Cadillac. There was someone sitting in the back seat. I froze, this time from fear rather than the harsh weather. I stood still, just a few feet away from the back of the trunk. The back of the person's head looked bleached and wrinkled. I realized the red band of fabric around it was a hat. Suddenly, the thought that it was Hank struck me. Fear mixed with anger, and I clutched the flashlight like a dagger, ready to use it as a weapon. I charged and swung open the back door. The inside was empty. I cursed and threw my light down onto the padded seats. I slammed the door shut and walked around the side, taking my place behind the wheel. I hit the gas and started barreling through. The landscape the car's suspension not easing the brutal terrain. I started to climb the small incline that led to the road. Finally, I swerved onto the paved path. Abruptly, the car stalled. Conked out, it moved slowly like a lame deer down the road. Suddenly, as I was trying to get the damn thing going again, a figure appeared in the glow of my headlights. My car came to a final halt within the figure's touching distance. This time, I could clearly make him out. He was a man, tall and emaciated. His skin had been leathered by the harsh sun, and his hair was a tangled rope-like mess. The face of a coyote. Skin from the skull of the creature dangled between the man's legs, acting as a loincloth. Other than that, and a crown of dried desert flowers across his brow, he was naked. A red dye had been applied to the upper part of his face, seeping from his hairline to down below his dark eyes, where only total blackness occupied dot within. Animalistic clamber. The man leapt from the asphalt and onto the hood. The car's engine gasped to life as the man positioned himself on the roof, taking a slender flint dagger from his loin strap and stabbing it into the windscreen. I cracked spread, like scary fingers reaching, and I knew a second attack would cave it in. I hit the gas for a second time, and my car began to surge down the road. There was a dull thud, and I saw in my wing mirror that the man had rolled off. I sighed, and vowing to never enter this state again, I drove off. If I had to guess, I'd say around 5 minutes passed, and I was doing 60 or so. That's when I heard it, a low pattering noise, almost drowned by the sound of the engine. It grew louder, and before I glanced in the mirror to confirm my position, I saw him. He was keeping pace with the car, running up to the driver's side window. I screamed and swerved the car, trying to knock him down. He simply dropped back a few yards before catching up again. It was an unnatural sprinting that put any athlete to shame, mixed with a predator's dash every time he dropped to all fours. Whenever I would hazard a glance back, he seemed to be in another stage of monstrous transmutation. His skin shifted and moved like a disturbed wasp next was trapped beneath it. As his bones cracked and reformed, he began to lag behind. By the time it began to howl and scream with a dozen voices of man and beast, it was lost in the darkness behind me. I gripped the wheel like it was the only thing keeping me alive and kept driving. I had stopped looking behind me at this point. My vision locked onto the road in front of me. My panic started to ease off after a while of not hearing or seeing the thing. I realized how fast I was going and a body rolled towards me. I slammed the brakes, but not before going. Over it with a crunch, I let out a strained gasp of defeat. Nursing my neck from the whiplash of the sudden halt, I put the car in reverse. Going over the body a second time, I moved back until it was laid bare in the light of the headlamp's beams. My suspicion was coldly confirmed. It was the body I had buried an hour before. I put my head in my hands, wondering if I'd taken a wrong turn and ended up in hell, sure of the landscape to match. I looked up and saw that the body was still there. It was definitely the same person. Although she now had an extra gloss of blood covering her, I could make out the mom jeans and luminous pink top. I sat still gripping the wheel for some time, paralyzed by both fear and choice. I knew if I left her there, she'd be found by the next passersby. I couldn't bear thinking about what my boss would do to me if that body's face was suddenly on. Every news broadcast across the state, even though I hadn't seen that thing that had been tailing me in almost an hour, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the darkness. All of my dread mixed together in my mind, clouding it and stopping me from thinking of the real question, where'd the body come from? I made my decision. If this was some sort of trap, I'd make sure I could easily get back to the car. I took a deep breath and reached for the door handle. Leaving the car running, I opened it and brought a foot down on the blacktop. Nothing. I climbed out of the car, leaving the door wide open. I stood up and looked around me. Nothing. I opened the back door, leaned in and grabbed my flashlight. I flicked it on and closed the door behind me. I turned and made my way towards the body. Nothing. I reached it. It had been damaged by the car, sure, but was still practically in one piece. I took my shirt off, my heart pounding for the split second it covered my eyes. The cold air bit my skin, but I fought through it. I used my worn short as a winch of sorts, wrapping it in a knot around the body's two arms. I grabbed the other end and started to drag her back around my car. Nothing. I heaved the body into the trunk, slamming it shut behind it. With my left hand shaking uncontrollably, I got back in the driver's seat, put my jacket on, and began to move the car off the road and into the desert. I descended onto the rough soil with a thud and slowly meandered further out until the road disappeared behind me. Once I reached an area that I hoped no one would find, I cautiously got out again. The dust beneath my boots shifted as I walked. I took the shovel from the back seat and balanced it over my shoulder. Standing in front of the trunk, I set the shovel down and balanced my flashlight in my mouth. I reached down with both hands and heaved it up, that the thing from earlier leapt out. At first, my brain didn't register what had happened. It wasn't until it had me on my back with its hands clutching my throat did I realize the flashlight was still in my mouth, shining brightly into its painted face. Its eyes were pure white and murderous. The jaw was torn down further than human anatomy allows, and its skin looked like dried leaves, barely connected to the flesh. Black spots appeared in my vision as the monster tried to tear my life away. Just before I passed out, my hand found a large, jagged rock. I swung my arm in an arc, bringing the rock down on the base of the thing's skull. It relinquished its grip, falling back long enough for me to get to my feet. I grabbed the shovel and brought it crashing down on the thing's head, buckling its neck. I lifted it again, primed for a second swing, when suddenly the thing flailed its right arm wildly in the air. As it did, the wooden handle of my shovel erupted into flame. Hands sizzling, I dropped the tool and bolted towards my car. The witch, or whatever was trying to kill me, descended to all fours. As I slammed the door shut, it reared up, head-butting the window. A large crack appeared as my car began to move, the uneven terrain brutalizing the suspension. The grotesque witch clung to the frame as I swerved violently. Its skull began to shift under the skin. Before it could transform, I drove into the one structure in the area, a lone standing rock. I turned just before a head-on collision became inescapable. The rock scraped against the side of the car like an iceberg against the hull of a great ship. The witch was pummeled against it as well and went flying off into the darkness. Eventually, the light from my headlamps illuminated the road, and I was once again driving on open highway. Not even for a second did I think I was safe, and paranoia became wholly justified when I heard the now familiar pounding against the asphalt. A glance in my mirror confirmed that the wish was once again gaining on me. Its legs were bent like a jackal's, or rather the bones were with the flesh, begrudgingly following the new form of their frame. The rest of its body remained humanoid for now. I accelerated several times above the speed limit. As the witch began to fade back into the darkness as I outpaced it, I heard a low hissing. Suddenly, the hatch to my glove compartment fell open. Dozens of writhing rattlesnakes poured out like liquid, filling the car's floor and darting between the pedals. More and more slithered from every opening in the now ruined Cadillac, surrounding me. I started to unwisely beat my head against the steering wheel and scream. When I jerked back and looked around, the car was free of snakes once again. I realized that I hadn't been bitten and that my hands passed through the reptiles like via POUR. I felt the cold hand of the witch clawing at my brain from within, attempting to induce whatever nightmare hallucination it so chooses. I shook my head violently, trying to free myself from it. When I opened my eyes, the warlock's face was pressed against the passenger side window. I accelerated again, leaving, it trying to catch up behind me. As I drove, the retro radio built into the wood veneered dash crackled and popped. From the static, a voice appeared. Deep and chanting, it soon became audible over the engine's roar. It screamed out in a language I couldn't begin to fathom. The anti-melody continued, and as it did, my eyes began to water. Soon, it felt like hornets were stinging them, tiny needles pricking in and out a dozen times a second. The pain was unbearable, and the half-shattered mirror confirmed that I was now crying blood. I swerved erratically from lane to lane, even mounting the desert sporadically. My hand found the radio and I punched it, and kept pounding until my hand disappeared into the mess of wires. I withdrew my now bloodied, broken hand from the ruined stereo, and it went back to clutching the wheel as best it could. A giant, gangrenous coyote was now running by my car. As my vision returned and the pain, at least the pain in my eyes, subsided, I tried to make the beast out. I couldn't tell if it was another hallucination or the witch transformed. Either way, I knew I couldn't keep going forever. The Cadillac, which was physically near destruction, was also now running on fumes. I knew I couldn't keep going for long, and the merciful part of my brain prevented me from thinking of what would happen when I stopped. And that's when it happened. I almost didn't notice it, and when it registered, I didn't think it of any importance. There was a line running through the road where one era of paving began and another ended. I passed it with ease, but the beast, on the other hand, came to an abrupt halt, like a car slamming into a brick wall. I left it in a cloud of dust, howling coated with a distinctly human frustration. I drove in silence for a few minutes. Silence was welcomed with open arms. I had practically sunken into my leather seats and was driving on complete autopilot. My brain played a reel of memories from the past few hours as it tried to tackle this incomprehensible scenario. It had no luck in doing so, and eventually gave up. I started to slowly calm until a voice piped up behind me. "I warned you," said Hank. I looked into the mirror and saw him sitting in the seat directly behind mine. I paused for a while before answering. "Are you real?" I said in a broken voice, terrified the witch might still be chained to my mind. "I used to be." He replied somberly. He sighed and took his hat from his head, clutching it to his chest. I now saw what it was hiding. His scalp had been cut away, exposing the dome of his skull. A ring of scabbing tissue circled his head like a crown of thorns, a remnant from his trauma. "What are you?" I asked. "Trapped," he replied singularly. I looked back at the road ahead. A little stream was starting to rise from beneath the battered hood, but I decided to ignore it for now. "What was that thing?" I said, knowing he'd understand the question. "He's been out here as long as I have," said Hank, glancing out the window. I waited for more of an answer, but none came. A dull glow appeared on the horizon, which grew in intensity as we neared. Soon, it took the form of the gas station. "Drop me off here," Hank asked, breaking a pattern of silence. I did as I was told, bringing the car to a stop just outside the pull-in. Hank opened the door and got out without thanking me. He walked around to where a young girl, Plum, was waiting for him. I noticed 2 arrows were now protruding from her abdomen. He took her hand, and I watched as they both walked inside. By the grace of God, my car started moving again, and I was away it did. However, die shortly after the sun rose. I left the now burning hunk of metal in a ditch and walked a mile or so until a haulage truck passed. It stopped for me, and I rode with him to El Paso. He was old, in his late 60s if I had to guess, and had a scruffy beard like an unwashed dog. I could see in his eyes that he did not know what lies beyond the veil. I have been on the run since that day, mainly from my employers. The body was disposed of safely, sure, but I never met with my handler, and certain questions were raised after they found what was left of the car they had supplied. When I say on the run, I mean I've been living a quiet life in a small town in rural Oregon. I'm a permanent resident and handyman at the B&B of a sweet old lady who reminded me of the woman who raised me. For me, it really is a quiet life, as since that night I haven't been able to speak. I often stand in front of the mirror and try to talk to myself, but the words are lost at sea and never quite make it out from my mouth. Naturally, I have taken to writing and think it's finally time you all know my story. "She's buried under that tree," my grandfather whispered, pointing out the window to the front lawn dock. Oh boy, I thought. Here we go again. For 90 years old, Grandpa was physically capable. He could move, do basic chores, and eke out a decent Existence. His primary weakness was his mind. Who's buried there? I asked, humoring his senility as I adjusted the angle on his lift chair. The girl with white hair and green skin. Green skin? I wondered. That's new. I fixed Grandpa's chair to the reclined position and made my way to the kitchen. I'm gonna make us some sandwiches. All right, sweetie. I left him there in front of the TV. This weekend was my monthly visit. My siblings and I switched weekends to make sure Grandpa wasn't alone. The location was inconvenient because he lived in the ass crack of nowhere. It was a good 2 hours to the nearest town. If he needed something other than general store items, he'd be driving for a while. After I finished the sandwiches, I slid one on a plate and placed it in Grandpa's lap. Thanks, honey, he said and started chewing with yellow teeth. I sat down on the sofa, cracked open a murder mystery book. A golf tournament was playing on TV. I hated golf, but that was the only thing he liked. So I occasionally glanced out the window at the beautiful vista to keep myself from boredom. Grandpa's property was strange in that it was high up in the mountains, appropriate for farming, but his specific land hadn't been built for that. He lived in a mobile home just beneath a hill. There were trees decorating the terrain, but the only one on his quarter-acre lawn was a pine my father had brought up years ago as a sapling. It was well over 12 feet now. She's buried there. He mumbled, devouring a slice of ham on bread. Why does he keep saying that? I focused my gaze on the tree in the lawn. What an odd thing to hallucinate. 2 hours later, I was interrupted by a call from my brother, Stu. Hey, Grace, he said, his voice as cheerful as ever. How's Gramps? Coping, I said. Grandpa had fallen asleep in his chair, a half-eaten sandwich in his lap. He's resting after a light lunch. Good, he needs that. I returned to the couch, saved the spot in my murder mystery. My eyes fell on the lonely pine outside. Stu, can I ask you something? Sure. Sis, has Grandpa mentioned anything about a green girl buried under a tree? Stu fell silent. Stu, give me a second. You there? Yeah, just a minute. A heavy sigh. When did he start mentioning it? This morning. Don't let him talk about it. Why not? Because he gets all worked up. When Jess and I were there last month, we found him digging a hole under the tree at 2 in the morning. He thinks someone lives down there. He belongs in a care home. I turned towards Grandpa, noted his frail shoulders, the muscles that had carried bales of hay and iron tools for years. Now his body was fading. Grace, I'm still here. Make sure he doesn't talk about it. It was 5:15 when I cleared the plates from the dining table. Thanks for cooking, sweetheart. Of course, Grandpa. Need help getting to bed? No, he sighed, seemingly deep in thought. He pushed himself out of his seat, waddled down the hall. It took him so long to reach the other end of the trailer. Grace, he stopped at this bedroom door. Yes, you do believe me. About the girl under the tree? Yes, Grandpa. Good. If anything happens, stay by my side. I'll protect you, huh? With that, Grandpa cracked open his bedroom door and slipped inside .fw. Act. My eyes shot open. It was dark. Maybe 1 in the morning. .fw act. A hard metallic noise thundered in my ears. What was that? FW act. I stumbled out of bed, disoriented, face aching with exhaustion. I ripped open the blinds. A man was swinging a tool at the foot of the pine tree. Grandpa? I raced to his room. The bed was empty. .fw act. The metallic clangs grew louder. What's happening? I ran to the sofa, grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and stumbled outside. The moon was barely up. Cold air bit my skin as I pulled my shirt close, covering my body. Just ahead, Grandpa was hunched at the 12-foot pine, swinging a pickaxe. I was so stunned to see him lifting the massive tool. Grandpa, what are you? She's coming, Grace. I have to set her free. Grandpa, it's 3 in the morning. I have to get her out. I grabbed Grandpa's wrist, but he shoved me back. I landed on my posterior, my flashlight's beam illuminating his face wide with terror. Don't stop me. Grace, if I don't let her out, she'll take you too. Without another word, he slammed his tool into the earth dock the next morning. Grandpa and I sat at the table chewing bacon and eggs. Neither of us had, Grandpa. He looked at me with weariness in his eyes. What happened last night? He let out a deep sigh, pulled out a worn shoebox from a cabinet. See this? He brought out a stack of black and white photos. This is your grandmother, Belle, and me a few years after we were married. And here, he tapped the face of an adorable boy. Is your father? In the background of the picture, I noticed a young girl, maybe 4 years old, perched on a fence, watching everyone with a miserable gaze. Who's that? The green girl. She's the one who's buried under that tree. She took your father and grandmother. Now she's coming for me. Why? Because she's death. Death. Boom. The front door lurched with sudden impact. Grandpa and I swerved our gazes, deep in fear and concentration. Didn't you think it was odd how Grandma died so young? And your father? Boom. This girl lived in the woods. She was there for each family member who passed on. Boom. My uncle aunt. When I figured it out, I found her in the woods. Made sure she never came after us again. You killed a child? She's no child, Grace. She's evil. And she's coming for me. Boom. I ran to the couch, peered out the window to see a hunched figure wearing old pioneer clothes. They were bashing their fists against the door. Someone's out there. It's all right, Grace. She only wants me. The slamming grew more intense. I retraced my steps to the table. Why is she harassing our family? I don't know, Grace, but it's been like that ever since I was a boy. Whatever you do, don't make eye contact with her. Boom. The front door caved in under the pressure. I closed my eyes, then reopened them. A strange figure stood in. The doorframe, about 4 feet tall, dressed in worn rags. Her skin was as green as a pine tree's leaves. Long white hair flowed down her back. She's here. The green girl shuffled toward us across the carpet. I watched in suspense. So, scared I could barely breathe. My eyes searched for a weapon and found a letter opener. I reached for it. Stop, Grace. This has to happen. I gawked in horror as the green girl lurched up to Grandpa, let out a blood-chilling gasp. Yeah. The sound of her breath stung my ears. Grandpa commanded, only me. That's the deal. The green girl grabbed his face with bone-thin hands and held her mouth over his. Sickening sound of rushing wind accompanied her widening mouth. Grandpa gave a frightened gasp, then collapsed. Grandpa. The green girl let out a sickening groan, limped back to the door. Wait. The creature looked at me. Why are you doing this? The green girl pointed at the clock hanging above the dining table, then pointed at herself, then me. For the next few seconds, I was too shocked to move. With a final groan, the green girl limped out the front door and was gone. It's been 2 days. I called the sheriff. They investigated everything. I've been asked so many questions that my siblings think I'm crazy. Stu's the only one who believes me. Why? He says that one night while he was at Grandpa's, he heard a woman speaking in one of the rooms. It reminded him of a soothing voice he had once heard as a young boy. A voice that told him the exact date he would die, and that date wasn't far off.